the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126 Balerion. As a smart cat, the black cat Balerion felt very lost these 2 days. The beautiful little master is very attractive, and there is a special aura about him that makes him feel at ease. So the black cat rarely pays attention to humans other than the master, but rarely does not mean never. Because the master never prepares food for it, it has to temporarily leave the master's side when it is hungry. Every time it does this, it will feel full of irritability, and when it looks at others, it always has the urge to tear them apart regardless of anything. This impulse is very tempting, but the black cat can always suppress its nature because it doesn't want to cause any trouble to the master. It's just that these 2 days, when it found that the master has been ignoring it all the time, and even its deliberate behavior of looking for a scolding did not attract attention, the black cat could no longer bear it. When it went out to find food in the morning, it jumped down from the wall of the Red Castle and attacked a passing male noble and finally scratched his entire face. When blood splashed all over his body and the human screamed in fear and fled in panic, the black cat felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as if some kind of revenge was satisfied. Deep in his heart, a number emerged, 43. This number appeared as if instinctively, but it was not like this at the beginning, and later it became less and less. The black cat felt that this number was very important to him, but he didn't know how important it was. In other words, sometimes when he felt bored, he would think, he is just a cat. Why do he know these knowledge that should only be possessed by humans? What is knowledge? What is a cat? The inexplicable thoughts that popped up in his mind made him unable to understand, so the black cat shook his head, looked at the back of the hurriedly running away, and began to lick his bloody claws. According to his limited but impressive experience, it will not be long before a group of fierce humans will come to chase him, intimidate him, and even want to kill him. He had already made these preparations, but he waited and waited but no one came, which made the black cat's emotions, which had calmed down a little due to the attack, become irritable again. It felt that those people shouldn't ignore it. There was no reason for them to ignore it. Aren't they very fierce? Why didn't they stab it to death? Stab it to death. They should stab it to death. Blood, screams, grins, drag her out from under the bed, one knife after another. The black cat was shocked by the picture that emerged in his heart, so it ran in the corner of the castle for a long time, and finally attacked another person, an old man holding a dog and behaving sneakily. It felt that this person seemed familiar, but it didn't matter. It just wanted to scratch him to pieces. It also successfully defeated this old human who looked tall, but was actually very cowardly. It was a pity that its little claws couldn't really scratch it to pieces, and finally it could only give up with regret. The number in its heart quietly became 42. It didn't run away afterwards, but squatted not far away waiting for the other party's reaction. It wanted to see the hateful eyes of these humans, just as it hated these humans. But the old man with grey beard just sat on the ground and cried, as if he was frightened, with snot and tears, and he didn't even look at it. The black cat felt something was wrong in his little head, so he didn't go away, but squatted in the corner, watching the cowardly old man, watching the dog in his arms running away with its tail between its legs, and watching a group of people arrive here soon. Then, it found that no one paid attention to it, and no one even looked at it. What happened to them? The black cat was very puzzled about this, and this puzzlement lasted until it returned to the little master's side. The irritability in its heart subsided, and its rationality recovered, and then it suddenly reacted slowly. Can't they see it? The little master is like this, the 2 people it attacked are like this, and even everyone is like this. Can't they see it? Question mark? In order to confirm this, it decided to take the risk of drinking some of the lemon tea in the master's cup, so it did so carefully. Then, it found that the little master who usually despised it was unaware of this, and even took a sip of the cup without changing his expression, and then continued to sit there and read attentively. Seeing all this, it was cheering and jumping in vain in its little heart, and even jumped off the table and kept shaking its head around its master triumphantly. However, when it found that its show-off behavior did not attract any attention, the joy in its heart disappeared instantly, and its wagging tail drooped down, and a sense of loneliness enveloped its entire young heart. That night, the black cat Baratheon hid in the corner, staring blankly at the little master, who was sleeping on the bed, feeling that the cat's life had lost all its meaning. And when someone sent a bird to the master as a substitute for it the next morning, it instinctively thought so. It was like a tiger whose territory was invaded, and its hair stood up, baring its teeth, and threatening the servant. However, no one paid attention to it, just as no one could see it, and no one could hear the sound it made. The servant stood respectfully aside, while the young master was playing with the ugly bird in the cage with great interest, completely ignoring him. The black cat felt very frustrated. He wanted to raise his paw to hit the hateful servant, but he rationally thought that this was not a good idea, so he finally collapsed on the carpet in the room and began to sulk. Then he suddenly found that the color of the hair under his neck was a little different from the hair next to it. This question made his small brain suddenly remember some hazy pictures, which happened when he ran to his master's bed to sleep that day. He also remembered that the bed full of the master's fragrance seemed to become very transparent at that time, and then some pattern appeared on his young master's wrist, and then he seemed to see a little golden thing floating up from under the transparent bed, and finally, in the end, because he was lying on the path where it floated, it ended up getting into his hair. It seemed to be like this, but the black cat felt that he seemed to have overlooked something. What was it? A laugh that sounded a little crazy? Or a fat pig with a pair of leaf wings? Thinking of this, the black cat's young mind was full of confusion again, because it didn't remember seeing or hearing these. But why could it remember this? Never mind, it doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter at all. Thinking of this, the black cat lay there dejectedly, feeling a little hopeless, and even the hunger that came not long after did not attract its attention. But when there was a special noise from the owner's side, it couldn't help but tilt its head to look over. Then it found that the little master, who was originally sitting on the marble base of the toilet, frowning and thinking, now had a colorful poisonous snake wrapped around his waist. The snake's head was raised backwards, and the pale yellow vertical pupils were staring coldly at it outside the door, and the tongue in its mouth kept shrinking. The black cat felt threatened, but it also saw the little master's face that seemed to be unaware of the danger, which made it jump up and scream shrilly, and then rushed up without hesitation. The seemingly powerful snake, in contrast to its previous hostility, quickly broke away from the boy's waist and slid its long body through the toilet hole on the marble base and disappeared. The black cat felt relieved when he saw this, and the childish voice that always made it feel so familiar also sounded in surprise. Oh my god, my belt. Chapter 127 On the road. The 2 days after the wedding were relatively peaceful, except that Renly's left hand mark flared up when he was using the toilet, causing his belt to crawl away. Another strange thing was that Grand Maester Purcell was attacked by an unknown animal, and his bloody face as he sat on the ground crying caused a lot of discussion. The servant claimed that he was attacked by a dog because someone saw a dog near the crime scene, but the person involved denied it, saying that it was his new dog and not the murderer who attacked him. However, when asked what specifically attacked him, the old man hesitated and couldn't say. The matter was finally left unresolved, and Renly didn't pay much attention to it. After the wedding, the only thing that needed to be busy was the moving away from King's Landing, but with the servants around, Renly didn't need to be busy with this. Instead, he began to raise birds leisurely. It was a beautiful canary, with orange and green feathers and a small body that made it look very cute. Unfortunately, after the servant brought it to him that day, Renly teased it for a while, but the bird squatting in the cage didn't pay much attention to him. It combed its feathers by itself, and occasionally chirped a few times, as if it had no intention of communicating with him mentally. Renly thought that this might require cultivating feelings first, so he didn't care. But when he woke up the next day, he found that the canary that was originally kept in the cage had disappeared. There was nothing but a pile of messy bird feathers. Renly was very alert about this, but he had no time to look for the murderer because the departure time had arrived. The king's wedding was equivalent to temporarily putting an end to all the previous events. Although there was a martial arts competition to celebrate the wedding later, not everyone was interested in it. So except for the knights, who were preparing to participate in the competition, everyone else left King's Landing, a city that had been bustling for a long time, and returned to their respective territories. Stark of the North and his lords, Lannister of the West, Tully of the Riverlands, and Tyrell of the Reach. Hundreds of lords spread out from King's Landing and rushed to all directions of Westeros. Among them, the team of the Tyrell family, one of the top nobles in the Seven Kingdoms, was very eye-catching. Compared with the simple team when they came, the number of personnel in the team was no less than 100, including grooms, cooks, servants, personal knights, crossbowmen. More than 20 carriages were loaded with armor, tents, and supplies. A large carriage embroidered with bright golden roses was the core of the team. The elite knights guarded the side, the soldiers guarded the periphery, and the servants with clear division of labor and constant busyness were at the edge. All of this was just to serve the two people in the carriage. One big and one small. Don't believe the rumors, Renly. Although there are several orchards, the territory of the Red Apple Fossoway family is not actually rich in apples. This name mainly comes from the archer Fosso in the Age of Heroes. He is the son of Garth Greenhand. It is said that, if he likes a girl, he will shoot the apple off her head. The tall Duke Tyrell smiled and explained the origin of the family emblem of his vassal. Opposite him, a boy with short charcoal black hair sat there and listened quietly. His amazing blue eyes blinked, and occasionally accompanied by a hint of sudden realization. However, in fact, he already knew what the other party said. This is a large carriage, the inner wall is wrapped in gold and silk, and the silk is made of smooth oak and metal. The space is spacious, and there are 6 horses pulling the carriage outside. The driver's shouting sounded quite dull through the carriage. The journey is long, and children cannot ride horses, so Duke Tyrell specially prepared this carriage for riding. Of course, the Duke himself also enjoys it. After all, riding a horse for a long time is very tiring. As the team moved forward, various trivial sounds continued. The huge khaki city became increasingly hazy as the carriages rolled forward, and finally submerged in the green mist behind. Surrounding it were patches of uneven plains and grasslands, and grey roads shrouded in fog spread across the plains in all directions. A large number of figures could be vaguely seen walking on these roads: free riders, open carriages, ox carts, vendors, missionaries, walking farmers. King's Landing is the central capital of the entire Westeros continent, and the roads around it are naturally connected in all directions. From here, you can reach any castle territory in the Seven Kingdoms. As we all know, the earliest knights came from the Reach, the earliest maesters also came from the Reach, and of course, the earliest singers, gardeners, stonemasons. So you don't need to worry about your studies in Highgarden, Renly. If you have studied the history of the North, you should know that the ancestors of the Stark family are also descendants of Argreen and Garth, which is enough to prove the long-standing heritage and rich heritage of the Reach. Bored on the way, the young duke with brown curly hair began to chatter to Renly about various historical legends and vassal lords of the Reach. Although Renly already knew some of them, he actually didn't know much about them. But he didn't listen to all of them. There was no lack of false boasting in the words of the Duke of Mace. For example, the ancestor of the Stark family, Brandon the Builder, was descended from the common ancestor of the nobles of the Reach, Garth Greenhand. There was basically no solid evidence for this except for some folk legends. In some legends, even the founder of the Lannister family in the west and the founder of the Baratheon family in the ancient Stormlands are descendants of Garth. It is said that the common ancestor of the Riverlands in the Age of Heroes can make infertile women, including menopausal old women, fertile with just a touch of his hand. It can be seen how exaggerated these legends are. Renly was not reluctant to leave King's Landing, because he didn't know many people there, mainly his 2 brothers. However, as a king, the former was busy with affairs, and the latter, as a sea minister, was also busy all day long. Whether Renly left or not did not affect the relationship between the brothers, because there were not many in the first place. In addition, the only acquaintances of Renly were Davos, the Onion Knight under Stannis, and Barristan, the King's Guard. However, after the wedding, Davos himself had already headed towards the rainforest of the Stormlands, preparing to inspect and arrange the territory given to him by Stannis. The latter came to see him off, but the question he asked made the black-haired boy unsure how to answer. Where did the black cat named Balerion go? Renly thought. You ask me, who should I ask? He explained that the cat ran away because of its nature, and he didn't know where it went. So the king's guard, who was a little sad, felt quite disappointed. Don't doubt it, Renly. We will meet many castles on the way, but you have to believe that only Highgarden is the most beautiful in the whole River Reach. No, the whole 7 kingdoms. The words from the other side interrupted the boy's thoughts. As far as he could see, Duke Tyrell with brown curly hair was looking at a small castle far away outside the carriage with a proud tone. This duke was a very vain person. He kept praising his territory and family over and over again, but Renly was not bored with these words. Apart from figuring out his own golden finger, his biggest wish was to be a traveler. He was naturally very curious about the legends and customs of various places. Is Old Town as smelly as King's Landing? He asked a more pointed question. Smelly? Lord Tyrell shook his head and said, I have to say that King's Landing is the stinkiest city I have ever seen. After all, there are too many people there. Old Town doesn't smell very good either, but I rarely go there to inspect it. I don't know if it has improved in the past 2 years. Is the water of the Red Lake red? Of course, otherwise why would it be called the Red Lake? Is the oak throne really a living oak tree? We all say so, but those damn Dornishmen didn't give us the chance to see it. During the conversation, Renly had certain expectations for his life in the near future, mainly because he felt that he had become much freer after being freed from his brother's control. But the boy in the carriage frowned unconsciously, and his left hand hanging by his side quietly covered something that suddenly appeared. It was a tender green branch stretching out from the corner of the carriage seat. It looked like just an ordinary grass, but it was not normal for it to grow on a fur cushion, and the reason for its appearance was just that Renly accidentally touched it just now. If you don't consider this special situation, the future life is still very exciting, he thought secretly. The mark on his left hand had occurred 3 times in the past few days. Once, it turned his buttons into stone. Once it made the dagger in his hand go limp. And the last time, it turned the wooden cup in his hand into a pile of sand. And the water in it spilled all over his crotch. The only lucky thing was that he was in his own tent at the time and was not seen by others. But the childish rumors that came with it made him quite distressed. It looked wonderful and interesting, but Renly only felt troubled by this uncontrollable ability. The team kept moving forward, and the people in it had their own concerns, while outside the team, the discussion about this group of people never stopped. The news that the king's younger brother Renly was sent to Highgarden as an adopted son had already spread in the River Bay due to some people's intentional or unintentional propaganda, and there was a lot of discussion. Chapter 128 The Gates to the Old World. The nobles of the upper class were busy attending the wedding banquet of His Majesty the King. The merchants and even the hired knights from all over the country were also discussing it. Even after the wedding, the discussion did not stop. As for the people of the Reach, apart from the wedding and the king, the most talked about was the king's younger brother Renly. Since His Majesty Robert sent his brother to Highgarden as an adopted son, it naturally means that His Majesty is no longer going to pursue the issue of the Reach standing on the Targaryen side. In the noisy wild inn, a simply dressed merchant said this to the person next to him. Of course we won't pursue it. A large piece of land has been lost next to the Stormlands. It doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with us. That's right. As long as there is no tax increase, everything is fine. Dragonstone should be given to the eldest son of the king. Could it be that Renly is our future king? How could it be? He has no right of inheritance. But traditionally speaking, what do you think Duke Renly looks like? What can a child look like? Hedge knights, mercenaries, businessmen, travelers, bards. There is never a lack of these people in the inn based in the wild. Therefore, there is always a lot of news gathered here. Of course, most of the news is fake. Sitting at a table in the corner of the first floor, White Deer Winder listened to the many discussions around her while drinking a bowl of rabbit soup. Her presence did not attract much attention because she was wearing a headscarf and a grey robe, and she was dressed very low-key. Women walking alone in the Seven Kingdoms are relatively rare, but not absent. Not to mention that she looks like a peasant woman living nearby. Who would have thought that this seemingly inconspicuous peasant woman was once a fierce female bandit famous in the Seven Kingdoms? Wenda listened silently to the discussions around her. Starting from King's Landing, she kept moving forward along a road called Rose Avenue. The further she went towards Highgarden, the more people talked about her own lord. People obviously regarded the arrival of the Duke of Dragonstone as a peace signal from the new king, and even some local residents of the River Reach welcomed it. After all, the Seven Kingdoms were all peaceful after the war, and the people of the River Reach did not want to be involved in war again. However, Wenda was alone here at this time, and her purpose was naturally not to understand the news that had already been known, but to find out some other things that she did not know. After the boy was canonized as a Duke of Dragonstone, the promise he made before had a basic condition for fulfillment, and when the two dukes left King's Landing and went to the River Reach, he even picked up Wenda and her son who had been waiting in King's Landing and set off together. However, following the big group was not the character of this former bandit. Although the war had just ended and the Seven Kingdoms were at peace, there were still dangers. When going to an unfamiliar environment, it was necessary to understand the local situation. So on the way, she always walked in front of the team to get all kinds of information for her little master. There is an old woman in Noble Heart who is said to be able to predict the future, but I don't know if it's true or not. The shadow cats in the forest have been very active recently, so be careful when you are traveling. Have you heard that a while ago, a woman who called herself Meager fell from the sky at Bitterbridge? She was wearing armor and crushed to death several pigs raised by Master Caswell. Is she the crazy woman who called on local farmers to follow her in rebelling against King Robert? Rebel against King Robert? Crazy woman. Yes, she was a lunatic. She called Baratheon a traitor and said she would kill all the warrior sons in the world. I don't know which crazy woman came out to talk nonsense. Everyone knows that there are no warrior sons in the Seven Kingdoms anymore. Everyone knows that Meager is a jerk, and that tyrant has been dead for more than 200 years. What a lunatic. What happened to that woman later? It is said that our Lord Caswell is busy hunting her down. Because of those pigs. Not just because of the pigs falling from the sky or emerging from the water. On this journey, Wenda has heard rumors of this kind of thing 3 times, each time more exaggerated than the last, and she feels it is absurd. Is this kind of interesting story about falling from the sky popular in the countryside recently? She remembered that, before she set out, there was also such news circulating in King's Landing. It is said that not long after the wedding of His Majesty the King, a large number of sea fish inexplicably emerged from a well in Flea Bottom, causing the surrounding port to scramble for them. Experience tells Wenda that such news is basically false, but the journey is tiring, and listening to it can relax her mood. But this time she didn't hear it all, because a middle-aged businessman in a linen shirt suddenly sat across from her table. "My dear lady, the journey is long. Why do you have to travel alone?" the middle-aged man asked with a smile, looking at the beautiful face of the woman opposite with his brown eyes. "Of course, I hope that some blind people can behave themselves," Wenda replied with a smile, and stabbed the dagger in her hand into the wooden table with a thud, the tip of which sank deep into the wood, causing her hand to tremble slightly. This was a warning, and also a signal. Seeing this, the other party's smile faded, and after sitting upright and coughing dryly, he asked, "I'm from Old Town. Where are you from, ma'am?" "King's Landing." "King's Landing." The middle-aged man with a pair of thin eyebrows touched his chin. "Is there any interesting new news there? I mean, news other than our King Robert's wedding? I heard that customs duties are going to be increased. Is this news interesting?" "That's terrible," the other party sighed when he heard it, and then, without waiting for Wenda to speak, he took the initiative to say, "A group of sneaky people have appeared in Old Town recently. They seem to be from the East Continent. They are spreading the word that the door to the old world has been opened, and everyone must find that door and close it, otherwise the whole world will be destroyed by the chaos behind the door." Ahem. Many doors in Old Town have been smashed by those crazy people recently. I heard that Earl Hightower is considering driving them out of the territory. Wenda laughed dumbly when she heard it. There is no shortage of crazy people in this world, and there are countless religious crazy people. For example, a sect in the East continent that believes in Ruler, the Lord of Light, is very abnormal in her opinion. She also knows a religion called the Stars in Place, in which everyone is crazy about worshipping a meteorite that fell from the sky and claims that it can save the world. This kind of news is too unrealistic and basically useless to Wenda, so she didn't care after hearing it and asked something else. Do you know about the Iron Islands? For thousands of years, the Iron Islands have been the main enemy of the Reach, so if there is any threat in the Reach, the Iron Men there are one. We only know that the mild-tempered King Coran died in the Shield Islands, and his son Balan became the new king. The merchant heard it and said, so we dare not go to the Iron Islands recently. Before we understand the temper of King Balan, no one can guarantee whether he will still abide by the previous rules. Wenda nodded, and then told another piece of news. The old Prime Minister of the Eagle family went at dawn. It is said that he was discussing peace talks. Maybe this will allow you to restore the trade route in Dawn. The merchant raised his eyebrows and said, restore the trade route. This is good news. God bless you. I hope Prime Minister Orin will make the process go smoothly. The blonde woman dressed as a peasant woman chuckled in response. After talking to her for a few more words, the merchant took the initiative to end the information exchange. Looking at the other party's back as she left, Wenda narrowed her eyes. This kind of information exchange is very common during the journey. She had encountered this kind of thing before. The information obtained is usually of no practical value, but that person doesn't look like a businessman, but a professionally trained spy. Is there a lord fighting nearby? The female bandit guessed secretly. Thank you to the book friend Dragon Cavalry Army for the 500 reward. Thank you to the book friend 20170517184954254265 for the 400 reward. Thank you to the book friend Yumengan. The book friend Mr. Say, the book friend Palonite and the book friend 2017092715161425 for the 100 reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129 High Court. As they continued on their way, the weather around them gradually became colder. However, it was not that the further south they went, the colder it would get. It was that autumn was coming. The climate of this world was very strange. There was no regularity in the change of seasons. For example, this summer had lasted for nearly 2 years. In Renly's memory, there were 2 years of snow-filled winter. Summer and winter were the themes of this world. Relatively speaking, autumn and spring were very short. The carriage moved slowly and stopped at many castles in the Reach. When the team arrived at Highgarden, the first castle of the Reach, more than a month had passed. The team had a large number of people, and the lords of the Reach always sent soldiers to accompany them for protection, so there were no unexpected situations. Except for Renly's left hand. The onset of the chaos mark could not be controlled, and it could not be predicted before the onset, so Renly was even a little cautious when peeing, and his daily life was seriously affected. He wore gloves, but sometimes this ability would ignore the gloves, and sometimes it would work directly on the gloves. Later, he found a solution that was not a solution, which was to wear 2 layers of gloves. This method sounds unreliable, but it is unexpectedly effective in practice. Although Renly was puzzled by it, he was somewhat relieved. In addition to the trouble caused by his left hand, the rest was only the fatigue that emerged from the continuous journey. More than a month of continuous travel was boring, even if he stopped to participate in the reception banquets held by the major families in the River Reach. Fortunately, Renly's physique was much better than before. Facing such a long journey, he did not get sick. On the contrary, Lord Tyrrell, who was traveling with him, accidentally caught a cold on the way. However, because of the consideration of the child's frailty, the team had a meester from the River Reach to follow, which did not make the Duke's illness worse. So when they arrived at their destination, Lord Tyrrell's illness was almost cured. Highgarden is the most beautiful castle in the 7 kingdoms. This was the sentence that Renly heard the most on the road. He had been a little skeptical before, but now he believed it. The carriage slowly moved forward in the hilly plains. He leaned out of the window and looked out. At the end of his sight, the castle made of white marble was located on a high hill with a gentle slope. 3 consecutive walls rose up and surrounded the hill. Looking from afar, the towers, green plants, fortresses, the rows of buildings had a strange beauty, which was obviously carefully designed. The land outside the castle was surrounded by a dense pine forest, with many sentry towers in the forest. As the team left the wilderness and walked into the forest, a wide river gradually emerged in front of them. Under the sun, the river with a bright luster flowed at the end of the pine forest. There were small boats leisurely in it, and the forest island was lush and green. The white castle called Highgarden stood quietly on the high ground on the other side of the river, majestic and exquisite, like a city-state inhabited by forest elves. This castle is not only beautiful, but also very large. The buildings are arranged layer by layer along the surface of the hill. At first glance, it can even be called a small town. However, in fact, it is just an exclusive castle where people from the Tyrell family can live. In comparison, Storm's End is a country bumpkin. Renly thought secretly. The team that passed through the pine forest finally stopped at the bank of the river in front of the castle. A straight stone bridge spanned the entire river and connected to the gate of the first wall of the castle on the opposite bank. Renly and the Duke of Mace got off the carriage and walked here on foot, and the other people followed behind. There were bursts of bird calls around, and the clear river water on both sides flowed at a moderate speed. At the end of the stone bridge is the entrance to the castle of Highgarden. Because someone had notified them in advance, the gate had been opened at this time, and a group of noblemen and women dressed in bright and beautiful clothes stood in front of the door. The number of people welcoming was huge and looked grand, but this was normal. After all, Renly represented not only himself, but also the king behind him. "Welcome, Lord Renly. We have been looking forward to your arrival." After approaching, the beautiful woman with long silver hair lifted her skirt and saluted the black-haired boy. "Just call me Renly, ma'am." The black-haired boy bowed in return and said seriously, "Don't call me sir, that's too much trouble. I'm not a child enough." The tender voice was full of seriousness, which eased the unfamiliar atmosphere a lot. The silver-haired woman smiled slightly when she heard the words, and the people around her also smiled. "Come, Renly, let me introduce you. This is my beloved Lady Ellery, this is my eldest son Willis, and this little fat boy is my second son Garland, and this is..." The joy of returning home made the Duke of Mace next to him particularly enthusiastic. Every time he introduced someone, Renly would politely salute the other party, showing great humility and politeness. This is the attitude that should be taken. Although he and the Lord of Highgarden, Mace Tyrell, are both dukes, in fact, the two are very different. Renly's title only sounds good. The territory and strength he actually owns are probably not as good as those of the other vassal. Among the 7 kingdoms, Highgarden, or the reach behind it, is basically the strongest region in terms of comprehensive strength. Not to mention Renly's small broken island, even Baratheon Stormlands can't compare to it. In Westeros, the Reach has the largest population, the most prosperous spiritual civilization, and the richest land. And if it weren't for the large number of gold mines in the Westerly territory, even the Reach would be ranked first in wealth. In comparison, the Stormlands, which is adjacent to the river bay, can be described as shabby. Due to climate and geographical issues, the lords of the Stormlands are all very poor, and the Baratheon family, the feudal lord, also has no money. Renly suspected that the Stormlands were the poorest in the 7 kingdoms except for the north. Mother has difficulty walking, and is waiting in the banquet hall. We have already prepared a welcome dinner there. After the group exchanged greetings, they passed through the castle gate, and walked on a green path full of thorns and hedges. The hostess of Highgarden said so. "I hope Lady Olenna won't be impatient to wait." Renly stuck out his tongue and said, "I heard that she has a bad temper." The boy looked a little uneasy, and the people around him couldn't help laughing. A thin boy in neat clothes said with a smile, "Grandmother does have a bad temper, but I think she just likes to tell the truth, which is sometimes hurtful." The person who spoke was Willis Tyrell, the eldest son of the Duke of Mace and the heir to Highgarden. He was a very gentle boy who was a few years older than Renly. The brown-haired fat boy next to him was the same age as Renly. For example, she has always disliked Gulen's body shape and would say a few words about it whenever she had something to do. The brother's words made the fat boy with a round belly look over with resentment. Willis, please don't laugh at me in front of the guests, okay? My good brother, you have to know what is laughing, the brown-haired boy replied with a smile. What is telling the truth? This made the little fat man angry, but the people besides him were quite happy. Renly felt that the two brothers were very interesting. He was not familiar with either of them, because the two did not exist in the drama he watched in his previous life, but in fact they were the leading figures of the next generation of the Tyrell family. In contrast, a little gay Renly knew, had just learned to walk at this time, and was being held by the Duchess's hand and following behind him with great effort. The other was just a little baby girl in a swaddle, sleeping soundly in the arms of a nanny. Chapter 130 Aftermath. The welcome banquet held in Highgarden Castle was very grand. The participants included the direct line of the Tyrell family, the collateral line, the retainers, and the lords and nobles who came from nearby. During the banquet, singers and jesters took turns to perform, and the steps were similar to those of the Red Keep dinner. But unlike the banquet in the Red Keep, there were not so many people here, and the participants were full of etiquette and upbringing. The overall environment and atmosphere seemed elegant and peaceful, soothing the nerves and relaxing unconsciously. As the protagonist of the banquet, people around him would always look at him, which made Renly feel a little uncomfortable, but he had seen many storms and even killed 2 kings, so he could still deal with it normally. There was no panic in his every move, but there was a kind of noble demeanor that did not belong to his age, which surprised many people who were observing him openly or secretly. However, this surprise basically did not exceed normal emotions. The disguise that began in infancy made Renly very good at controlling his performance and would not arouse excessive suspicion from people around him. There were many participants in the banquet, but there were only a few who were worth paying attention to. Willis Tyrell, the heir of this castle, is a gentle and intelligent teenager. His mother, who was born in the Hightower family of Oldtown, is beautiful and elegant. His younger brother, Garland Tyrell, is playful and active like a child, as well as honest and kind. In addition, the direct descendants of the Tyrell family also have the 2 babies, Loras and Marguerite, but they are too young to be worth paying attention to. Of course, Renly did not ignore the most respected member of the Tyrell family, the mother of the Duke of Mace, the widow of the former Old Duke, and his future adoptive mother, Elena Redwine. She was a skinny and short old lady in a green robe, sitting at the first seat, and her every move was very crisp and clear, but under the candlelight at the dining table, her sparse teeth were particularly obvious when she spoke. Your grandfather was a good man. He married a Targaryen. When Renly came forward to greet her, she said, in fact, they also wanted me to marry a Targaryen. How many years ago was that? I don't remember clearly. It doesn't matter. Anyway, Kit, have fun in Highgarden. Obviously, she didn't plan to say anything more to her adopted son. Renly also greeted her tactfully and didn't continue to stay and disturb her. Therefore, he didn't hear the conversation that happened here. Do you understand? Seeing the black-haired boy mixed in with the group of grandchildren and playmates in the hall, the thin old lady turned her head to look at her son standing behind her. What do you mean, mother? The tall Duke of Mace was stunned when he heard the words. I mean, his grandfather and I are from the same generation, you idiot. The old lady said tartly, what were you thinking, that you let a 5 or 6-year-old child be my adopted son? Without my knowledge, you let yourself have a younger brother who is younger than your son? The Duke wanted to say that he was about the same age as Robert, so what else could Robert's brother be, if not his adopted brother? But he knew how difficult his mother was, so he simply said nothing. Unfortunately, the other party had no intention of letting him go. I'm really curious about what your dead demented father would think when he knew about this. The old woman rubbed her cheek and said, and the previous words seemed to involve her few remaining rotten teeth, so that her expression became more and more dissatisfied. It's nothing serious, mother. The Duke of Metz noticed that something was wrong, so he hurriedly answered carefully. It's really nothing serious. The old woman's straightforward answer made the Duke speechless, but the next sentence made him feel pressured again. What about Jenna? She is just a stupid and fat hen, and you actually want her to be the queen of the 7 kingdoms? I think this maybe it can save our family from its previous decline. You know, mother, if we, how could that D leave the lions that support him and come to get close to us, a group of roses with thorns? Do you think he is an idiot like you? The old man interrupted his son without any hesitation. I'm not an idiot, mother. I almost succeeded. If you're not an idiot, then what are you? I'm your son, mother. The Duke replied in a dissatisfied tone, emphasizing the word son. That's what I hate most. The old man replied with a toothache, because it makes me wonder if I accidentally broke my stomach when I was drunk. Otherwise, how could I give birth to a stupid son like you? The Duke couldn't answer this question, and obviously didn't contradict the old mother's idea. After hearing this, he just sighed, turned around and prepared to leave, so that he wouldn't be bothered. Seeing this, the old man suddenly grabbed his clothes and asked with a serious expression, now you see, everything you did in King's Landing has been spread. What do you think the Green Apple family will think? It's just a wealthy knight family. As long as I appease them a little, what else can they think? The Duke of Metz replied disapprovingly, like appeasing a dog. The old man asked sarcastically, what will the lords think of you playing with them like a dog? No, a group of dogs. How can this be called playing? Well, although it is true, but didn't Jenna become the queen? The engagement is still valid. I don't think it will have any impact. The Duke replied. You have to know that dogs will bite when they are angry. The old man sneered. Then what do you say? The Duke of Metz said with some dissatisfaction. Ask me to apologize. The old man did not answer this question, but suddenly changed the subject. You wrote back before and said that someone took advantage of you? Yes, said the Duke of Metz, otherwise I wouldn't have that idea. Obviously he has begun to find a way to excuse his behavior. Who is it? Have you found it? The Duke was hesitant. At first, his main focus was on how to conquer Robert, and he didn't pay much attention to this matter. We were short of manpower, and there were too many people in King's Landing at that time, so you just need to answer whether you found it or not. The old lady rubbed her cheek and said, do you think I like to hear your excuses so much? No. The Duke of Mace immediately replied, there are no clues. Very good. Not only have you been fooled, but we haven't even figured out who fooled you. As the old woman spoke, she looked at the black-haired boy who was chatting and laughing with his grandson at the banquet, and sighed. Not to mention that you have gained a reputation for being untrustworthy and disrespectful to vassal ministers. You also attracted the attention of the lion. What did you get in the end? A little Baratheon brat. Tell me, what use can he be except for making my teeth ache? Did you bring him back on purpose to piss me off? This is enough to prove that Robert. What do you think we, as the defeated party, did not lose much benefit? The favor of that deer. It's better to have something than nothing. The Duke argued embarrassedly. That's right. The old lady nodded in agreement, leaving her son Mace Tyrell speechless again, but the next sentence he heard made his face serious. How does that saying go? A Lannister must pay his debts? The old lady asked meaningfully. Obviously, she was referring to the deterioration of the relationship between the Tyrells and the Lannisters in this incident. How could we be afraid of them? The Duke of the Reach answered righteously. If nothing unexpected happens, the next generation of kings will have half the blood of a lion in their bodies, and our good neighbor to the east has now become Stannis, who you have besieged for nearly a year. The old man reminded him, how are you going to deal with it? Do nothing? And wait and see if these small problems will become big problems? The Duke of Mace didn't speak, as if he didn't think much about these things. Seeing this, the old man sighed and said, didn't find out who it is. Very good. The sea monster seems to be quite honest recently. This won't do. Take it out for me. Mother, are you talking about the Iron Islands? The Duke of Mace was stunned when he heard this. What does this have to do with us and the Lannisters? Use your brain, my dear son. The old man sighed and said, what good will it do you to be mad at me to death? Thank you to the book friend Qdeng for the 40,000 reward. Thank you to Black and White Blade for the 1000 UN reward. Thank you to 3000 Dreams Return and African Black Deer for the 500 UN reward. Thank you to Zyanatang 246. Breathing Free, Eat a Cage, Reduce Macro, Cans_Luaxuan. 2017092715161425 for the 100 yuan reward. Chapter 131 Mouse. If you don't have the habit of getting up late, Lord Renly, a servant will knock on the door on time before breakfast and take you to the dining room. After the welcome banquet, Willis Tyrrell, the heir to Highgarden and the next Duke of the Reach, personally sent Renly to the residence arranged for him in the castle. Walking in the quiet white corridor, the young man with the length brown hair said to the black-haired boy beside him, "After breakfast, it will be the teaching time of Mr. Romis. You have already met Mr. Romis at the banquet, so I won't introduce him in detail. At present, he will teach me and Garland in 2 times. Garland is still learning to read, and I have a little interest in stargazing. If you like it, Lord Renly, you can join me. Of course, it is best to plan according to your current academic progress. Maybe we can consult the Meester tomorrow morning. Just call me Renly, no need to be so polite." Renly said, "You are my grandmother's adopted son and the Duke of Dragonstone. I can't be so rude." The other party replied, and then said jokingly, "Unless you want me to call you uncle?" Renly laughed at this, and the other party continued to speak. "I need to learn etiquette with my mother for a period of time before noon. I think you will come with me. In the afternoon, my father will meet with the lords from all over the River Bay who come to ask for instructions, and will also deal with some civilian affairs in our territory. During this period, I will always be with him. If you are interested, you can also come with us. Don't be shy. My father has instructed this before." The young man spoke softly, and his eyes were quite gentle. He looked very hospitable. He wore a brown leather coat that was very common among the nobles. Except for the golden rose embroidered on his chest, he looked like a knight's squire. According to Renly's understanding at the banquet, he was indeed a knight apprentice and was currently learning the way of knights from the coach of Highgarden. "I will be practicing riding and spearmanship in the afternoon. I'm sorry that you can't join me, Lord Renly, as you are not old enough. But you may be able to practice swordplay with my brother Garland, of course, provided that your body can withstand a certain level of training. If you are interested, we can test it tomorrow." Renly nodded and said nothing. The other party continued to instruct him on the food, clothing, housing and transportation of Highgarden. As he spoke, the golden rose on his chest slowly bloomed in Renly's sight, like a book moving in the wind. Finally, when they arrived at the door of their residence, the polite brown-haired boy bowed to the boy. "It's nice to meet you, Lord Renly, and welcome to Highgarden." Renly returned the greeting, then watched the other party leave, and touched his chin. He felt that this Willis was much more interesting than his father. He was already quite mature and stable at a young age, and his attitude was sincere and friendly. He didn't have the spoiled and arrogant temperament of the children of the great nobles at all. It's just a little too polite. Thinking of this, he looked back at the room he was assigned. This room was much larger than the small room he had in King's Landing, but it did not lose its exquisiteness. Looking around, the milky white marble floor reflected a hazy light under the candlelight, and the floor was covered with a brand new green meat carpet, neat and square, without a trace of dust. The boy standing at the door looked to the left of his body, and the carved wooden door of the bathroom came into view, which was no different from the Red Castle. In addition, there were reading desks, bedside tables, fireplaces, bookcases, exquisite silver-plated round mirrors, wardrobes, and even wine cabinets. At a glance, all kinds of furniture in the room were available. The bed placed in the depths of the room was not too big, but it was completely enough for him to sleep alone. The surface of the bed was covered with silver silk, and there was a goose feather mattress underneath. The light blue curtains covered the entire bed, which looked elegant and clean. Everything was beautiful. The only pity was that the glass windows here were not as big as the floor-to-ceiling windows on the balcony of the Red Castle. Although they were not small, they looked like an oval mirror, because the glass was not pure. The moonlight from outside penetrated in and shone on the milky white surface, making it look hazy and trance. This room was at the top of the White Tower. When you open the window and look out, you can see a vast field outside the huge castle. Now it is covered by the silent starry sky, and the rose fields on the field are swaying with the night wind. It is said that the field east of Highgarden is full of golden roses like the Tyrrell family emblem. The light is dim at night, so it is hard to see clearly, but Renly is looking forward to what kind of beautiful scenery he will see when the sun slowly blooms from the east. In short, he is very satisfied with everything he has just arrived, whether it is the people here, or the environment here. It would be better if this thing didn't exist. Muttering, he sat on the soft head of the bed, and raised his left hand. At this time, he was wearing a black velvet glove on his left hand, which made his originally petite hand look much longer. Now the joints of the glove were constantly trembling, and it seemed as if his fingers were moving around. However, in fact, it was not Renly who was moving. After frowning, he took off the glove, and the change happened in vain. Under the black glove was originally a thin white silk glove, but now after it was revealed, it seemed to have become a living creature that could move. After squirming and breaking free from the boy's hand, the white glove flapped its wings like a bird and flew around the room, looking very panicked. Obviously, a glove could not have any eyes, but after flapping for a while, the bird clearly found the exit in the room that was deliberately opened by the boy, so it quickly rushed over, and its back disappeared from sight not long after. Renly then closed the open window tightly, blocking the cold wind from outside. Then he thought for a moment, turned around, dragged out a box from under the bed, and opened it with the black iron key hanging around his neck. This box was his trash can, which Renly had brought with him when he left King's Landing, and was delivered to the room by servants in advance when he attended the banquet. But now his behavior was not to check if there were any missing items inside, but to observe something inside. In this wooden box, there was a sealed glass bottle. The slightly blurred glass seemed to be not transparent enough, but a gray-haired mouse could be vaguely seen. A stupid mouse that did not move except for breathing instinctively. However, it was not just a mouse. After observing for a few times, Renly took out the glass bottle, then slumped on the ground without caring about his image, holding the bottle in both hands, and began to shake it vigorously. With a crackling sound, the hazy grey figure was shaken around like a mess, but no matter how it was shaken, there was no screaming sound. So when the shaking finally stopped, the mouse didn't realize that it had turned into a small white hen. Renly opened the bottle and poked it with a dagger. The hen looked up at him and clucked, but didn't react. So Renly put the lid on and started shaking it again. Then the hen turned into a toad, the toad turned into an apple, and the apple turned into an octopus. With the continuous shaking, the creatures in the bottle changed in 1,000 ways, like a ball of dough that could be kneaded and changed at will. The only things that remained unchanged were its dull expression and some corresponding instincts. Renly stopped only when the contents of the bottle turned into a floating grey energy ball. He then stared thoughtfully at the grey substance dangling in the air for a moment before slowly turning back into a mouse. The mouse was actually its original appearance, and the reason for its transformation was simple. He fed it the sprout that had grown on the carriage seat. As for the release, the editors noticed today will be delayed, so the release originally scheduled for this Friday is cancelled. If nothing unexpected happens, it will be released next Friday. Chapter 132 Replacement and Alienation. The journey from King's Landing to Highgarden was quite long, but Renly did not do nothing during this period. Wearing gloves to block the attack of the mark on his left hand was always a bad idea. If the chaos caused by the mark could not be completely resolved, Renly believed that he might never be able to live a normal life again. So he had been doing experiments in secret during this period. If you want to solve the mark, you must first understand it. Renly's first step was to do this. The rat in the jar in front of him was a process he understood. In addition, he also referred to the water cup that turned into sand, the soft dagger, the stone-like buttons, the bird-like gloves. The mark had many attacks along the way, which also brought him sufficient experimental materials and reference items. So he came to many conclusions. The most basic point is that the things produced after the mark attacks are divided into two categories: living and non-living, or moving and not moving. The moving things include the chicken leg at the beginning, his belt, his velvet cape that suddenly came alive on the road, and of course the flying bird that the gloves turned into. These things seem very strange. At first, Renly thought that it might be the mark that gave these items the ability to come alive, but he later came to another conclusion. That is, the mark stuffed various animals into these things. This speculation has been hinted since the belt Although he was a little absent-minded when going to the toilet, and although the belt ran very fast, Renly still saw the movement of the belt after it changed. It crawled like a snake. Later on the road, his cloak also came alive, and its appearance, after coming alive, was even more obvious. It was gathered and folded into shape, like a hollow cloth pony. The later gloves and flying birds were similar to this situation. To be more certain of his guess, Renly in the tent tried to stab the most conspicuous pony to death. Although the cloaked horse was wrapped in air and there was no effect, when his dagger pierced the surface of the cloak, the monster struggled and staggered violently, as if it had been pierced, which looked very scary. Then, when it was completely dead, and turned into a dead cloak with a hole in it, Renly touched the body of a real pony, an invisible body. He determined that this attack of the mark was not to give life to dead things, but to stuff living animals into it. Then the question is, how is this unreasonable stuffing done? Where did those animals come from? Were they moved from the surroundings out of thin air? Or is there something else he doesn't understand? Many questions troubled Renly very much, and when he found a thread-like flower growing on the sleeve of his arm holding the dagger, he understood another point. Although the horse died, the power that caused it to be stuffed into the cloak did not disappear, but was transferred to his sleeve, and then the sleeve was stuffed. If this is the case, the conclusion is very simple. The process of the mark is the process of stuffing one existence into another. However, the mark is not limited to these stuffed living things, but also the buttons that turned into stone and the cups that turned into sand. If these two are considered, it seems that it is not just stuffing. It is a replacement. Replacing one existence with another. The buttons and cups were replaced very completely, so their appearance changed, while the belts, chicken legs, gloves, and cloaks were not completely replaced, so they could only wear their original appearance and do things that were completely inconsistent with their appearance. Let's not talk about the source of this replacement, how to replace, the survival problems after the replacement, and why there is such a strange situation as incomplete replacement. Simply understanding the replacement still makes Renly feel relieved. Then he had another doubt. If it is really just a replacement, then what about the grass growing from the cowhide cushion? Did the grass replace a piece of the cushion's epidermis? Renly thought it might be so before, but when he did this experiment with the grass and the mouse, when the mouse in the bottle underwent such a transformation, Renly overturned, or increased his guess. The ability of the chaos mark is not limited to replacement, but also alienation, a very inexplicable alienation. Therefore, he summed up two conclusions. The onset of the mark is just releasing two kinds of energy, one is replacement and the other is alienation. The second conclusion is that there is only one kind of energy released by the onset of the mark. After this energy appears, it will spontaneously integrate into the object it touches, and then a replacement effect will occur, replacing one existence or completely or incompletely with another existence. But there is also a small chance that it may cause the object to mutate. This mutation made the cushion grow grass, and also made the mouse that ate the grass become a magical creature with 1,000 changes. Although this ever-changing seems to be useless, the associations triggered by it make Renly's perception of the chaos mark completely different. The time of the energy of the mark is uncontrollable, but after the energy is released, it is basically fixed. The energy does not exist in the completely replaced things, but by killing the incomplete replacement, the energy can be released for the second time. In addition, the situation similar to the alienated grass can also be controlled by him. In other words, if the assumption is correct, he can actively create strange creatures like this mouse. What's the use of this? Renly has not thought about it yet, or is not sure. Due to the uncontrollable secondary emission of invisible energy and its uncertainty, Renly is afraid that the energy will penetrate into his body when he does it himself. So except for killing a foal for the experiment at the beginning, he only fed a mouse with the grass along the way, and did not create other test targets. In other words, he is not sure whether the energy emission is 1 or 2, nor is he sure whether the specific function of the alienated things is just changing the appearance like this mouse, or whether there will be other abilities. Under the candlelight in the exquisite room, the black-haired boy slumped on the cold ground, looking down at the tattoo on his left wrist thoughtfully. A mouse will undergo such a wonderful change after being alienated, and what will happen if this energy really enters the human body? The next morning, after having a hearty breakfast with the Tyrrell family, Renly was taken to the Maester's room by two brothers, one big and one small, and began to formulate his future learning goals. The Maester serving the castle of Highgarden is called Lomis. He doesn't look old, only in his 40s, with a tough face. Standing under the only window in the room, his bald head is particularly obvious. Judging from the remaining hair on both sides, he should have been a blonde handsome guy before, but unfortunately the cruel reality made him reveal the state of an old man too early. I'm good at ravens, languages, history, astronomy, and medicine. I also have a certain understanding of taming hounds and falcons. After saying hello, the bald Maester claimed so. Then I wonder what Lord Renly learned when he was at Storm's End and the Red Keep. There is basically no need to continue learning heraldry, and the basic reading and writing of common speech are almost the same. Renly replied, there is nothing else. In fact, he knows a lot of things, but those things cannot be brought out. However, these 2 points alone are enough to prove his diligence. After all, these two kinds of knowledge basically run through the childhood of every noble child. Under normal circumstances, a child under the age of 6 would not be so learned. No need to continue learning, are you sure? Maester Romus frowned when he heard this, feeling that this child likes to brag. Heraldry involves the lords of the entire Westeros. Lord Renly, we have to learn more than just the heraldry related to the Stormlands. Renly shrugged. The other party then took out a book of heraldry and began to test Renly carefully. Which region of Westeros is Bear Island located in? In the north, in the western sea of Winterfell, in a harbor called the Frost Bay. Renly answered, and without asking, he said, the Mormont family rules Bear Island. The family emblem is a big bear in the green jungle. The family motto is to stand tall. The current head of the Mormont family is Jorah Mormont, who inherited the status from his father Jair Mormont. The family's original history. The endless words made the Maester nod frequently. Then he asked about the remote territories in the Vale, the weak families in the Iron Islands, the mountain lords in Dorne, and even some extinct ancient families. The original unbelief gradually changed. The brown-haired boy Willis, who was standing aside and listening quietly, finally couldn't help but look at the fat boy who was about the same age as Renly, or 1 year older than Renly. Seeing this, the other party pursed his lips and muttered something in a low voice before his brother said anything. I've tried very hard, but what can I do if I can't remember it? The voice was not loud, but it stopped the question and answer appropriately. Maester Lomis, who was sitting behind the desk, glanced at the fat boy, coughed dryly, and then said to Renly, okay, my lord, you really don't need to continue to study heraldry in depth, and I won't test your reading and writing of the common language. Then let's get to the point. What do you hope to learn from me? History and language. Renly thought about it and answered. Although the copy world you entered seems to be able to be changed, there is only one example, and Renly cannot be sure whether the world he enters next time will be connected with the previous one. Of course, he can't guarantee when he can enter next time. The dagger he brought is always silent, and the fragrance has always been so faint. It has been almost 2 months since he got it, and it has not increased much. At the same time, although he entered a new environment, this castle obviously does not have the rich background of King's Landing, which can make Renly smell the fragrance. As for languages, I'm good at High Valyrian, Low Valyrian, and the dialects and slangs of the 9 free trade cities in addition to the common language. In addition, I'm fairly proficient in Dothraki and trade language, and I'm also basically familiar with Carthene and Lazarin. What is more special is the Old North language, which is a very ancient language. It is said that the wildlings outside the wall are still using it. Are you going to learn all of them, my lord, or just a few of them? High Valyrian was the common language of the ancient Valyrian freehold. After the destruction of the Valyrian freehold, this language was basically no longer used, but Renly was more interested in it because he learned from Rhaenys that this language involved dragons. Low Valyrian is basically equivalent to the common language of the 9 free trade cities in the East Continent. Of course, the Low Valyrian used by each city-state has a certain localization and dialect, so it needs to be classified in turn. Renly, who has the dream of being a traveler, has long wanted to explore the East Continent, and naturally would not let go of this language. As for other languages like Dothraki and ancient languages, he had no interest in them. He was not interested in the barbaric nomads and his memory, nor did he want to go to the dangerous far north to talk to a group of wild men, still a little bit, so he didn't plan to spend time learning them. He was somewhat interested in the last trade language, because it was a kind of professional jargon commonly used by sailors and pirates around the world. After expressing his own thoughts, the bald scholar nodded, and Renly's studies in Highgarden were basically finalized. However, what no one knew was that because of the discovery of the left hand, Renly was actually going to learn another subject besides these, a subject that most scholars considered useless: magic. Thank you to the book friends Inlin95 and the book friend Hehoas Agia Gemisi for the 10,000 rewards. Thank you to the book friends Eduiale Mujang for the 500 rewards, and thank you to the book friends Zyanatang 246 and Kandiine for the 100 rewards. Chapter 133 2 months. Under the gloomy sky, several multi-masted longships slowly moved forward on the grey sea. The cold autumn wind blew, and the swollen sails made the nettle whip pattern on them particularly obvious. Standing on the deck of the Meditation, Ironax, wearing black leather armor, looked at the vague shadow of the island in the distance. The extreme desire in his heart made his eyes narrow unconsciously. Captain Ironax, I still think it is inappropriate for us to go to sea without permission in violation of King Baron's ban. The middle-aged first mate behind him leaned in and whispered, his weather-beaten face full of worry. Even the drowned priests can't stop the Ironborn from going out to sea. That is the natural right given to us by the drowned god, and no one can deprive us of it. The black-clad captain, Ironax, snorted coldly upon hearing this. How can Balon compare to the drowned god? But if King Balon knows about this, will he kill all of us? The captain's question made the first mate's face change, but then he laughed dryly and comforted himself. Although King Balon is not as gentle as the old king, he doesn't seem to be too strict. So what are you afraid of? Balon hasn't even secured his position as Seaston yet. How much energy do you think he has to take care of our affairs? Ironax in black said with a grin. Besides, we are just going out to fish, and we can't do anything else. He said so, but his eyes were looking covetously at the faint shadow of the island. There was no need to resort to force. As long as they showed up around the sea area of the island, they could get a good reward. This was a very cost-effective deal for Captain Ironax, who had been ruled peacefully for a long time, and was even very poor. However, he actually had another idea in his heart. Or rather, they were more eager for the ancient way that the Ironborn relied on for survival before the establishment of the Targaryen dynasty, which was the way of burning, killing, and plundering, rather than guarding the poor broken island in the sea to fish and mine. Unfortunately, it was not the right time yet. Thinking so regretfully, a white shadow suddenly passed by Ironax's eyes. The strange appearance made the black-clad captain suddenly look up. After a few glances, he frowned and then signaled his deputy to take the bow and aim. He was aiming at a white bird, which was now soaring around the three-masted sail. It looked leisurely and at ease, and he didn't realize that he had been stared at. So when an arrow was shot, it was nailed to the wooden pole of the sail without any reaction time. After struggling for a moment, it seemed to become motionless. This precise archery made several sailors not far away cheer loudly. Captain Ironax laughed and scolded them a few words. Then, under his order, a sailor climbed up the mast like a monkey and rushed to the place where the arrow hit. At first, the sailor did not understand why his leader insisted that he go up to pick up the arrow after shooting a seabird to death. But when he gradually climbed to the target, he was shocked to find that it was not a bird that was shot, but a glove. A small white glove that was fluttering in the sea breeze. It's really strange. What kind of wind can blow it so much like a bird? The muttering in his heart did not hinder the young sailor's actions. He held the wooden pole with one hand and used his other hand to forcefully remove the arrow that nailed the glove, and then bit the glove in his mouth. Then the young sailor began to climb down. During this time, he felt that the thing in his mouth seemed to be moving abnormally, but the sea breeze was strong, and the sailors didn't pay much attention to it. So after jumping back to the deck, he handed the glove fluttering in the wind to his captain. However, just as he was surprised, the sailors around were all stunned by this. Did you hide the bird and use this glove? To fool our Captain Ironaxe? Are you a fool, Doran? Look at the material of this glove. It is much more precious than a bird. Then why is it a glove? How should I know? The black-clothed captain standing at the end of the deck ignored the crew's discussion, but lowered his head and stared at the white glove in his hand, frowning and saying nothing. I don't know if it's an illusion. He always feels that the thing in his hand seems to be moving by itself, not the wind around. Thinking about it, he saw the glove in his hand suddenly flipped and fell towards the deck, and he quickly reached out and grabbed it tightly. Just as the black-clad captain did this, he suddenly felt an inexplicable palpitation. After a moment of trance, he couldn't help but look at the many crew members behind him. An inexplicable thought emerged in his mind. Gudeo is not dead. The sound of wooden swords colliding in a courtyard somewhere in the castle was dull and loud. The two boys, wrapped in armor made of wood chips, were practicing with sweat on their heads. They might have consumed a lot of physical energy, and their every move at this time seemed very clumsy. Hurry up, faster. Master Garland, what's wrong with you today? Didn't you eat enough? A middle-aged coach wearing brown and black leather armor and trousers stood not far away with his chest folded. His light brown hair was tied into a ponytail behind his head. His brown eyes were fixed on the movements of the two boys, and he scolded them from time to time. At the same time, with the hot training atmosphere in the courtyard, crisp and leisurely harp notes floated from above, mixed with the sound of weapons clashing and footsteps moving, and there was an inexplicable feeling of battle background sound. What a stupid brain, Tob. You clearly had the chance to hit him on the head, but why did you always hit him on the arm? Do you think this is a child's play? If you were still so restrained in the real battle, you would have been killed by the enemy long ago. The coach's voice was a little angry. The scolded boy blushed and felt ashamed. However, his opponent was not having a good time in this training. His fat body was a little clumsy, and the mean coach ridiculed him from time to time. Master Garland, do you know why the pig raised by Wilder is always beaten? Why? Because it doesn't know how to hide. The fat boy was indignant and a little aggrieved when he heard this. I couldn't help listening to Renly's harp, so I was distracted. As he spoke, he glanced at the guy leaning against the wooden railing in the attic above. The black-haired boy who was the same age as him, but didn't have to train, but played the harp in his arms leisurely, was so annoying in the eyes of the fat boy at this time. Don't make excuses, Master Garland. The sounds on the battlefield are much harsher than these, the coach said, while looking at the green-eyed boy opposite the fat boy. Look, although he can't move freely, Tob is not affected by the sounds. The coach's words made the boy named Tob blush again. After carefully looking at the fat boy opposite, he looked at his own master above him for help. As a commoner child, he was already very restrained to be arranged to practice with the children of the nobles. The coach's praise made him panic. Although this kind of practice has lasted for more than 2 months, the shy boy is still very nervous about it. However, facing his gaze, his own master above him just gave him an encouraging smile, and the harp in his hand spit out a cheerful note. So Tob had to continue the practice with a nervous mood. The sound of the harp rang out again. It seemed to be a rhythmic and elegant song, and it seemed to be played casually. The two boys who were concentrating on the battle ignored it, or tried not to, but some men and women passing by on the attic corridor could not ignore it. So along with the praise or attention, the experience bar of someone's bard profession was slowly increasing in an imperceptible manner. Yes, increasing. Although it was not shown on the system panel, Renly, who was immersed in playing, could still faintly feel that there were inconspicuous forces gathering with him being noticed by the people around him, which was completely different from the situation when he was practicing alone. Renly believed that this was the right way for him to advance in his profession. The way he practiced alone at the beginning was actually the wrong way. After all, the skills contained in his knight profession were basically not low, but the level was still entry level. In addition to the situation he faced when he obtained the knight profession, he easily guessed some of the joints. Only when doing related behaviors, the corresponding profession he had would have nutrients for improvement. Renly was not sure why this happened, just like he could not understand the specific situation of his left hand more than 2 months ago, when the experiment was not carried out. For such extraordinary things, he only vaguely guessed that they might be some kind of belief power, but only God knew the details. Anyway, he could feel that, if he continued like this, his career would be promoted sooner or later, so he did not pay much attention to the question of why, but the exact time of promotion was another unknown. Thinking of this, his moving finger suddenly stopped, and then he hurriedly got rid of his previous sloppy appearance, sat upright and straightened his posture, and began to play with his head down, pretending to be immersed in the ocean of music. Unfortunately, his behavior did not hide from others. The silver-haired woman who was walking towards this side not far away frowned, and then her pace quickened, causing a group of maids following behind her to pick up their skirts and chase after her. Behave properly and don't act like a country rogue, Renly. The woman approached and said this to the black-haired boy, and without waiting for his response, she continued seriously, "Come with me. Although the time is not right, I need to teach you the sitting etiquette again." Renly blinked when he heard it, and then followed her obediently. A fat boy below caught a glimpse of this situation, and laughed with glee, and then was scolded by the harsh coach. It is hard to imagine that in the 2 months spent in Highgarden, the most difficult person to deal with was not the famous Queen of Thorns, but the Duchess who looks dignified and elegant. Chapter 134, Rituals and God. Hand position should be relaxed and natural, not as stiff as a piece of wood. Yes, relax, that's it. Don't raise your head too much, and crossing your legs is absolutely forbidden. Your eyes. Don't always stare at other people's eyes, it will make people nervous. It's best to do this when you express your opinions or listen. The most important thing is to keep your clothes clean at all times, and never sit on wooden railings or dirty places. Servants can wash your clothes for you, but you have to pay attention to your image yourself. A rigorous female voice sounded from a bright and spacious room. The black-haired boy honestly corrected his sitting posture according to the words of the silver-haired woman opposite him. His focused look couldn't be better at learning. After just more than 2 months of contact, the Duchess basically understood the laziness of this person's character. Every time he learned etiquette from her, he seemed to be very perfect, but in fact, when he really left the course, he was casual, as if he had never learned those things at all, which made people feel helpless. Of course, due to the fact that this boy was less than 7 years old, this situation was actually very normal, or the boy's performance was already good enough, but Lady Ellie felt that her husband's adopted brother could do better, but she didn't think about it. I understand how you feel, Renly. It's very tiring to maintain a polite sitting posture at all times, but as long as you get used to them and turn them into your own habits, then everything will be natural. You should try to do this, and I believe you can do it more easily. Except for the serious female voice, there was no other sound in the spacious room. The autumn wind outside the window blew in with the withered yellow leaves, slapping on the nearby paintings, and making trivial sounds. A man and a woman stood in the Mirish-style portrait. The man was Mace Tyrrell, the Duke of the Riverland, who was dressed in a gorgeous dress, and the woman was naturally the Duchess in front of him. With silver hair and a short dress, the lifelike portrait was hung on a large light green feather bed, and the surrounding furnishings were casual and natural. Obviously, this is the residence of the Duke and Duchess. In the past, Renly would come here with Willis, the heir of Highgarden, and his younger brother, to learn the etiquette of the nobility. Now that he was being taught a lesson alone, he was the only one left. The teaching lasted for a long time, until it was getting dark outside, and a big-breasted young nurse came hurriedly with a crying baby girl in her arms. "Madam, please think of a way quickly. Miss Margery has been crying non-stop, and I can't comfort her, no matter how hard I try." The nurse's anxious voice accompanied the sharp cry of the baby girl, making the Duchess, who had been serious before, suddenly run over with a nervous look on her face. Renly, who was standing next to her, also came closer and curiously raised his feet to look at the pink baby in the swaddling clothes. At first glance, he felt that it was a bit ugly. "You have a loud voice." Muttering secretly, Renly bowed to the Duchess appropriately and left. Then, when he walked out of the room, he met another person who was also closely related to him in his memory. The beautiful child with big eyes and thick brown hair was led by a servant to stand outside the door. When he saw the black-haired boy step out, he greeted him in a baby voice. "Brother Nanley, you should call him uncle," Renly corrected. "Brother?" the child asked blankly, as if he didn't understand the meaning of the word uncle. Renly rubbed his forehead, which made him laugh foolishly. As a result, the Duchess, who was worried about her daughter crying in the room, happened to hear it and glanced over. The child was so scared that he quickly shut his mouth. The black-haired boy no longer wanted to tease this little gay. After a dry cough, he turned around and hurried away. Many servants in the corridor greeted him respectfully when they saw him. Occasionally, they could see members of the Tyrell family, who were also very polite to him. Renly responded in turn. Life in Highgarden was simple but fulfilling. After getting up in the morning and having breakfast, he went to the Meester Tower to learn languages and history, and then went to the Duchess with 2 companions to learn noble etiquette. In this way, the morning tasks were basically completed. In the afternoon, Renly would occasionally go to the government hall at the front of the castle to listen to the Duke of Mace dealing with government affairs related to his vassals and knights, and spend more time practicing his bard profession. When there was a dinner party in the evening, he would attend the dinner party, and when there was no dinner party, he would hide in the room to read books. The gloves were very useful, and the occasional accidents on his left hand basically allowed him to keep a normal mind at this time, and more often he was at peace. Last month, his 6th name day came quietly, and he didn't tell anyone, but the people of the Tyrell family seemed to have known it for a long time. The celebration dinner personally organized by the silver-haired Duchess was grand and warm. Master Crescent of Storm's End also wrote him a letter after his name day, congratulating Renly for growing 1 year older, and asking about his academic problems. The old man is now assisting the acting Lord of Storm's End in managing the affairs of Stormlands, while Stannis, the Duke of Stormlands, has been in King's Landing and has not returned. In Renly's territory, Dragonstone also sent a letter by Raven to report the basic situation. A Meester named Cance wrote it personally. Cance is a new Meester assigned to the Citadel after Renly was knighted. He has never met him or heard of this name, but the letter he wrote is concise, sharp, and decisive. In short, there is basically nothing to worry about in the outside world. Now he only needs to concentrate on staying in Highgarden, the first castle in the River Bay, to grow and learn with peace of mind, or do experiments. This is very much in line with Renly's expectations. Life in the castle was also uneventful, except that he couldn't sleep well every now and then, because he always felt that someone was sleeping next to him. However, he woke up several times and didn't find any trace of anyone. After a while, Renly felt that he had encountered a haunted incident again. He didn't make much progress in the left-hand experiment because he was still worried that the secondary release would affect himself, so he kept hoping that the situation like the grass last time would appear, but it didn't happen. This may be because the gloves limited the energy, or it may be that the mark has been emitting replacement energy instead of mutation during this period. In short, there was no progress in the relevant experiments. After more than 2 months of study, his etiquette level was improved from the original LV1 to LV2. The long-term history study did not allow him to acquire any historical skills, but one day he quietly gained a legend and anecdote LV1. Language is a big project, and there was no movement for a while. Putting aside the obvious studies, the magic he was learning by himself at this time also made him confused. There is not much information about magic in Westeros. If it weren't for the huge library of Highgarden, he probably wouldn't be able to find even one book about it. However, even if there were professional books, he still felt confused because they contained various professional terms and a lot of paragraphs with difficult meanings. After looking around, the only thing he could be sure of was that in this world, there was no supernatural energy such as magic element, and the wizards did not connect to some kind of power in nature when they arranged rituals and cast spells. It was God, Lord of Light Ruler, the three-headed god, the Black Goat, Scythian Cicaesar, the Lord of the Sky, the Lady of Waves, the Stone Bull of Pharos. Renly was unfamiliar with all the names, except the Lord of Light. There were no such gods in Westeros. The 7 gods occupied this ancient land, and the only heresy belonged to the old gods of the north. Thank you to Jans Hangaiden 1981 for the 500 reward, and thank you to Xianatang 246 for the 100 reward. Chapter 135. War breaks out again. Magic seemed to have suddenly become theology, but Renly could barely be considered to have a general concept of magic. After all, in his previous life, all kinds of fantasy novels described magic over and over again, and there were all kinds of them. However, Renly was scratching his head. In the past, when he was at Storm's End, he had asked Mr. Crescent about magic, and the other party replied that this was a useless knowledge that only a few people in Old Town were proficient in, and the few Meesters who chose to study this course were generally ridiculed. Old Town was already the center of knowledge in Westeros, and even there, few people mastered this knowledge, and obviously there would be no such knowledge in the castle of Highgarden. But he couldn't understand it by reading books alone. He originally thought that learning this knowledge, combined with the special power of his left hand, might have some strange chemical reaction, but now it seems that this path is simply not feasible. Not to mention that he couldn't understand the books. Even if he could understand them, he couldn't believe in any gods. Renly finally had to give up for the time being and began to focus on other things. Learning knowledge, etiquette, performing and playing, occasionally activating his left hand to see if he could stimulate different experimental materials. The days in Highgarden were dull and fulfilling, but after living here for nearly 3 months, he suddenly heard a piece of news that made him feel quite strange. It was a gloomy afternoon. In the government hall of the castle's outer court, a scout was reporting the news to Lord Tyrell, who was sitting on the oak chair in the hall, and his words made the young duke pause while stroking the ruby ring on his left hand, and then repeated the question. Several Ironman longships attacked Fairy Island? Yes, sir. The dusty scout in leather armor replied, but they were not many in number. They just took advantage of the chaos to rob some property and women and retreated. They did not cause much damage to the locals. Fairy Island is a fiefdom of a family called Farman in the west. It is not too far from Casterly Rock, the feudal lord of the Lannister family, and is naturally protected by the Lannister fleet. However, the people of the Iron Islands dared to launch an attack at this time. The more than 10 people in the neat hall looked at each other in bewilderment. They really couldn't understand why such behavior occurred. How presumptuous. Do those Iron bastards still think that the current era is 300 years ago? I really want to see how the Lion will deal with this matter. The knights and retainers under his command were discussing it, and the first duke was also pondering about it. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall his mother's words a while ago, and his later actions. But that shouldn't be the case. Why are they so crazy? He couldn't help asking, could it be that Balon has the intention to rebel? Our insider reported that this should be the captain of the attacker's own decision. The scout replied, it is said that King Balon is also very angry about this. A retainer with a black beard nodded and said, Balon Greyjoy has just sat on the Seaston throne and has not yet consolidated his position. It is impossible for him to provoke the Westerlands at this juncture. But since His Majesty Robert ascended the throne, no one from the Iron Islands has ever gone to swear allegiance. Another person pointed out, Balon should have gone to King's Landing and kneeled to the new king, but he didn't. Maybe he really has the intention to rebel. Gars, the steward of Highgarden standing beside the duke, said, those Iron bastards think about restoring their ancient ways all day long, but they don't know that the times are different now. That kind of lawless plundering is simply impossible. Provoking the unified 7 kingdoms? It's simply, ouch. Before he finished speaking, he couldn't help but let out a loud fart, and the entire meeting hall suddenly became silent. Everyone quickly closed their mouths, or held their breath, and looked up at the ceiling. Gars, the steward of the High Court, was the young duke's uncle. He was nicknamed the Fatty. He had a round face, a red nose, and a fat belly. He had a bad stomach, and couldn't help but fart. Everyone was used to it, and the person involved just smiled without any embarrassment. So the atmosphere remained dull and tacit until the wind from outside the hall swept away the stench, and then someone continued to speak. He has the intention, but I'm afraid he doesn't have the energy to spare. Blackbeard's retainer said, a group of crazy drowned men have recently appeared in the Iron Islands, claiming to be holy warriors under the command of the son of the drowned god. They believe that submitting to the Iron Throne is a shame for all Iron races, and the Greyjoy family's surrender to the Targaryens during the War of Conquest is a shame among shames. So they are calling on the Ironborn to resist the rule of Greyjoy and the Iron Throne. Under such circumstances, it is unlikely that Greyjoy will have any rebellious thoughts. Son of the Drowned God. This title surprised everyone. Although not everyone studies history, and even fewer know the history of the Iron Islands. As the saying goes, the person who knows you best may be your enemy, and the nobles of the Riverlands have a 1,000-year-old feud with the Iron Islands. That was a figure from hundreds of years ago. The fat High Court steward said with a smile. Even if they are old, they can't still follow that liar who died more than 200 years ago. Are they crazy? Maybe they are really crazy. Otherwise why would they attack Fairy Island? The Iron races are all crazy. The black-haired boy didn't listen carefully to some of the discussions that followed. He stood quietly on the right hand of the Duke with the brown-haired boy, but lowered his head and pondered. Although a long time has passed, he has only experienced 3 copies in total, so it is impossible for him to forget his first time. It can even be said that he personally erased the son of the drowned god who fooled people. In the original history, the son of the drowned god was also beheaded during the reign of King Aenys, and he also died a miserable death. But that was nearly 300 years ago. Why did he, or his followers, appear now? Did the original plot also have such a thing? Renly carefully recalled his past life memories. Apart from the education and experience after reincarnation, the only thing he knew about the Iron Islands was a eunuch and a psychopath. He was raised in the north by the Greyjoy eunuchs, and he could barely remember that the Iron Islands seemed to have launched a rebellion against the Baratheon dynasty. But he didn't know how the rebellion happened, and the process during it. Obviously, his golden finger was not Beidou Encyclopedia. Due to the vague memories of his previous life after reincarnation, he even recalled sulfur, nitrate and charcoal for a long time before he remembered them, and then the research and development failed, not to mention the world background setting of a bad TV series. He didn't get the answer to this question in the end, and he could only classify it as something that would happen in this world. However, for some reason, Renly always had an inexplicable sense of deja vu in his heart, as if something was wrong. Where is it? He thought hard, but couldn't figure it out. After the attack on Fairy Island, the situation on the entire continent was turbulent, but it had no effect on someone in the castle. Nearly a month later, he accidentally heard a piece of relevant news. It is said that King Balon of the Iron Islands wrote a letter to King Robert on the Iron Throne, claiming that the civil strife in the Iron Islands made it impossible for him to fully control his vassals, but he had personally beheaded the captain and crew who plundered Fairy Island. King Balon claimed that he would do his best to quell the riot and then give a satisfactory explanation to the Queen's family. At the same time, he also claimed that he would do King Robert's order to go to King's Landing to swear allegiance as long as the rebellion was suppressed. It seems that the new Iron King is quite honest and does not seem to want to rebel against the Iron Throne. However, in the 5th month after Renly arrived at Highgarden, a piece of news that no one expected spread like a stormy wave and quickly spread throughout Westeros. The huge fleet of the Iron Islands took advantage of the cover of night to sneak into the coastal territory of the Lannister family in the west, raided the important city of Lannister Harbor, and burned a large number of warships anchored outside the port. The Westerly Navy was abolished as a result, and a large area of the coastline was left without armed forces to defend it, leaving the gates wide open. The Ironmen began to use their ancient ways wantonly, and the smoke of war swept over everyone unprepared. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136 Gossip. The news of this sudden rebellion touched the hearts of countless people. Even Renly, who usually didn't like to pay attention to such things, couldn't help but wonder whether his brother's rule would be shaken. Many lords who were hostile to Baratheon were secretly watching how King Robert, who usurped the Iron Throne, would deal with this sudden rebellion. The king's response was simple. He didn't hesitate, negotiate, or talk about anything else. He directly summoned the lords and knights of the Seven Kingdoms to go west to participate in the war and beat him. So the recent Westeros continent was turbulent. Aren't you worried at all, Renly? In a courtyard somewhere in Highgarden, the brown-haired boy Willis leaned against a white marble column, looking thoughtfully at the black-haired boy sitting on the railing next to him reading a book. More than 5 months have made the Highgarden air much more impolite than at the beginning, but this also means that the relationship between the two has become closer. "This is your brother's kingdom. I'm just a child," Renly answered without looking up. "There's nothing I can do if I worry, so I won't worry." This sounds childish, but it makes sense if you think about it carefully. After a few months of contact, Willis felt that the boy in front of him was actually quite precocious, and this made some thoughts in his heart more active. If you can witness this war with your own eyes, I think you will feel more at ease, right? He said tentatively. "It's hard to stay in the castle and wait for news." "It's okay," Renly answered. "A year ago, Robert was fighting outside, and we were besieged in Storm's End for a whole year. It was much worse than now." The brown-haired boy was a little speechless after hearing this, and then thought about it, and simply spoke frankly. "Letting the Ironborn continue to wreak havoc will have a great impact on the future of the Reach. So my father is ready to respond to the call of His Majesty Robert, and is currently summoning his vassals to join the war." As he spoke, seeing the boy's eyes leave the book and look at him, Willis said sincerely, "I want to see this war with my own eyes. You know, Renly, I will become a knight sooner or later, and knights cannot avoid war." "Then go and take the opportunity to gain some experience," Renly replied with a blink of his eyes. "Father won't allow me to go. He said there will be many dangers." The brown-haired boy replied helplessly. "War is bound to be dangerous." Renly nodded in agreement. "We had no food at Storm's End, and many people almost starved to death. But I've analyzed it. If the war goes well, then we won't be in danger. If it doesn't go well, then the Ironborn will be able to harass the Westerlands and the Reach at will. By then, even Highgarden won't be safe." "It seems to be the case," the black-haired boy answered blankly, and Willis rolled his eyes when he heard it. "Renly, don't play dumb. Can't you express your own opinion?" After studying together for a long time, he knew a lot about the boy in front of him, but he didn't believe that this guy was really as simple and naive as he seemed. "What do you want to say? Don't you just want me to go with you to instigate your father?" Renly had already seen through the other party's purpose, so he said bluntly, "Let me tell you, that's impossible. You are the next heir to Highgarden, and I'm a guest of the royal family. If something happens to you, it will be a great loss to Highgarden. If something happens to me, how do you think your father will explain to my brother?" The sudden change in tone made people feel uncomfortable, but Willis was encouraged by it. "Don't you want to see the ocean and war? And the Iron Islands? I heard the customs there are very unique. I've seen it a long time ago. It's nothing more than two groups of people fighting each other, but the battlefield is replaced by the sea." Renly said casually. "Iron Islands? There's nothing to see. A place where no one lives." Willis thought he was bragging, or he didn't want to pay attention to him at all, so he sighed and said, "Don't you get bored staying in the castle all the time? The world outside is very exciting, and there are many things we don't understand. Smart, mature, but not interested in most things, not very rule-abiding, and seems a little lazy." This is Willis's perception of Renly, but he likes some new and strange things, such as magic, or mysterious legends like the Children of the Forest and the White Walkers, and he is very curious. Unfortunately, Willis didn't know that with a strange left hand, the surprises and novelties in life were enough for Renly, so he was not interested in it. "Your Excellency is right. War is very dangerous, and victory or defeat in a war at sea cannot be determined by the number of people," the boy said with drooping eyelids. "So I still like to stay in the castle honestly. This is the safest way. And didn't you say you were going out hunting a while ago? Walking dogs and releasing hawks. I'm looking forward to this." The adventures in the dungeon world are enough to wipe out Renly's desire for adventure. In reality, he just wants to live a quiet life, but he doesn't want to live a life of constant twists and turns inside and outside the dungeon, worrying about his own safety all day long. That would be too bad. And he is still too young. However, things that Renly has no interest in are full of attraction for many young nobles who have not encountered setbacks since childhood, so the brown-haired boy did not give up. "We don't actually need to go to the front line. We just need to stay in the rear with my father and Earl Redwine. That way, unless the war situation is one-sided, we will not be in any danger. Renly was indifferent when he heard it. My plan is to unite some friends of the same age, to go to my father to propose it, not just you and me. This way, the possibility of success is not small. Renly shrugged. Are you so timid? Renly, I don't think you are such a person. Willis used the method of provoking. I'm just a child. Of course I'm not timid. Renly said, raising the book in his hand and pretending to concentrate on reading. But the other party still did not give up, but slowly told the many baits he had prepared in advance. They all say that there are the remains of a sea dragon in the Iron Islands. Sea dragons, it sounds very interesting. Don't you want to meet them? Those followers who claim to be the son of the drowned god seem to have suddenly appeared. No one has seen them before. Renly, aren't you curious? I heard that a sea monster appeared in the Iron Islands a while ago, just like the one on the Greyjoy family's coat of arms. Rumors are not credible. Renly finally couldn't help but retorted. The sailors always say they have seen mermaids, ice dragons, and even the god of storms. I don't know if they really saw them, or just saw them when they were drunk and sleeping. I don't know about mermaids. The brown-haired boy shook his head. A sea ghost appeared a while ago, and it even has a name. Oh, what's the name? Renly was surprised when he heard that. It would be fine to just hear about ghosts and monsters. There were many superstitious rumors in feudal society, but a ghost with a name would seem to have a certain credibility. Moreover, he has not forgotten that there are actually supernatural powers in this world. Although they are rare, they are not non-existent. It seems to be called Jasper. The brown-haired boy replied, many sailors on the west coast claim to have encountered it. It is said that the sea ghost will ask whoever he meets how to get to White Gull Village, and then disappear after asking. I don't know where the White Gull Village he mentioned is. Jasper? White Gull Village? Renly frowned when he heard that, and felt that the two names sounded familiar. Thank you to the book friend African Black Deer for the 500 reward, and thank you to the book friends Cyanatang 246, and Eta Cage for the 100 reward. Chapter 137, Letter from Junlin. The atmosphere became dull, because of the last sentence. Then, under Willis's surprised eyes, Renly pondered for a while and finally agreed to his proposal. Why did you change your mind suddenly? He asked curiously. I'm going to see what this sea ghost looks like. Renly answered truthfully. White Gull Village, Jasper, although a long time has passed, and the information is not very important to him, he still recalled what these two are from the corner of his memory. When he first entered the Drowned Man dungeon, a boy from the same village he met was called Jasper, and he was called Hal at that time, and was born in White Gull Village. So the question is, why do people in the dungeon, or dead people, suddenly appear in the real world and become a so-called sea ghost? Is it because Jasper turned into a sea ghost in the original history, or is there some change in this world that he doesn't understand? He couldn't help but think of the followers of the so-called son of the drowned god. This question seems very important, so Renly changed his mind. But before that, he needs to make a lot of considerations and preparations. For example, if he really goes out to sea, will the curse on his body take effect? For example, how to persuade Lord Tyrell to let him join. In his opinion, the brown-haired boy's plan of gathering a petition has a very low chance of success, so Renly has no hope for it. Or, just like the treatment he received in King's Landing, he would never leave the castle under normal circumstances, so he could only use abnormal methods. Thinking thoughtfully, Renly said goodbye to Willis, who was delighted by his successful persuasion, and returned to his room in Highgarden Castle. After pondering for a moment, he took out a piece of parchment he usually used for calligraphy practice from the bookcase, and found a dagger to cut it to the right size. Finally, the boy sat on the chair, picked up the feather pen on the desk, dipped it in the ink in the bottle, and began to write on the letter paper. At this time, the sky was approaching dusk, and the sunlight outside the window shone in through the translucent light green glass, which looked hazy and beautiful. Lines of pure black paragraphs of the common language were bathed in light, looking like wonderful puzzles growing from the bottom of the hazy ocean. As he continued to write, the rustling sound of the feather pen rubbing against the paper continued. The fine words gradually covered the entire piece of letter paper. Finally, the black-haired boy took out the Duke's seal of the crown stag from his trash can, dipped it in red sealing wax, and stamped it on the letter. Thus, a very realistic royal forged letter was completed. I didn't expect that not changing the coat of arms would have such a benefit. Muttering quietly, he temporarily put the letter on the desk to dry, and then sat on the carpet again without caring about his image. He picked up the glass jar in the trash can, looked at the mouse breathing quietly inside, took a deep breath, and then shook it vigorously. Seagulls, tree stumps, books, until it turned into a stupid crow. The black-haired boy stopped with satisfaction. The next morning, in the room of the bachelor's tower, the bald middle-aged bachelor was teaching and inculcating relevant information about the outbreak of this war. King Corran, the father of the rebel leader Balon Greyjoy, was a unique leader of the Iron Islands. His goal of ruling was to integrate the Iron Islands into the Seven Kingdoms. To this end, he not only hired maesters to serve in the Iron Islands, but also liberated all the slaves in the Iron Islands. At the same time, he imposed heavy taxes on many of his vassals who forcibly took concubines and actively participated in the Seven Kingdoms foreign wars. This series of measures is contrary to the ancient customs of the Iron Islands. King Corran is obviously ready to abandon the ancient roads that the Ironman once relied on for survival, and his wisdom and means are enough to suppress the dissatisfaction of his vassals. Unfortunately, before he could achieve his goal of ruling, he died in the war against the Shield Islands. The Maester said, sighing regretfully, "The Shield Islands are a series of islands off the western coastline of Highgarden, guarding the river connected to the sea under Highgarden Castle, that is, guarding the entire Highgarden and the Reach. During Robert's rebellion, the Iron Islands had been on the sidelines, and finally, when they saw that the rebellion was basically certain to win, they belatedly sent a fleet to attack the Reach, Robert's original enemy, and caught the tail of the war. Unfortunately, their achievements were few and far between, and they did not have much impact on the Reach. King Corran, who wanted to abandon the ancient roads of the Iron Islands, also died in the war, so his eldest son, Balon Greyjoy, who was more devoted to the ancient roads, inherited the throne of Seaston. Interestingly, the reason why King Corran participated in the war was because of his son's instigation. Corran Greyjoy died in battle, and his eldest son Balon Greyjoy sat on the Seaston throne, but time was short and his foundation was unstable, so how can he gain the support of his subordinates after becoming the new king? Facing the three students who were listening quietly, the bald Maester analyzed, a war that shows a completely different goal from his father's rule, will make those iron races who advocate the ancient ways fully support Balon. At the same time, His Majesty Robert was crowned not long ago, and the timing of the war seems to be just right. Corran's peaceful rule has been for quite a while. There should be a lot of people who agree with his idea of integrating into the Seven Kingdoms, right? Renly, who had been listening silently, suddenly asked, how did Balon convince those lords in such a short period of time to give up Corran's efforts and support him in launching a rebellion? This question involves the cause of the outbreak of the war. Although Renly remembered that the war did exist, he felt that it should not have broken out so early, and it was due to the suspicion that arose yesterday. He always had the idea that all this was related to himself, although he thought that this idea did not seem to make sense. He definitely needs to win the support of those people. The navy of the Iron Islands is very strong, but that is based on the premise that all the Ironmen are united. If you can't even appease your own nest, then it would be particularly unwise to start a war, or it would be too risky. Willis nodded in agreement. This question will have to wait until we win the war, and Balon himself will answer it, the Maester said evasively, and then indicated that today's class was over. He actually couldn't figure out this question. My plan is halfway through. I'm currently preparing to contact the brothers Brian and Edwy of the Fossoway family. After the bald Maester left, the brown-haired boy whispered to Renly, "Call me when you go to petition." Renly replied, "What are you talking about?" The fat boy on the side had a vague feeling that he was being excluded, but after the two looked at each other mysteriously, they did not answer his question, but stepped out of the room. The fat boy pouted in frustration. On the other side, after finishing the teaching, the bald Maester almost walked on the stone stairs leading to the Raven room, thinking about his three students as he walked. Master Willis was still as smart as ever, and the young Duke of the Baratheon family had a vision and sharp thinking that surprised him. The only one who needed more care was Master Garland, but Master Garland was a second son, and was too young now, so he didn't need to learn more about some things. Maybe I should ask the Duke. Thinking of this, the bald Maester paused when he heard a violent impact on his forehead. He looked up and found that he had arrived at the door of the Raven Room. In addition to being a doctor, the Maester's daily work mainly involved raising ravens and sending and receiving letters. Apart from that, teaching was just a secondary task. So Maester Amos went to the Raven Room very often every day, and he would come once after each teaching session. After rubbing his painful forehead with his hand, the bald scholar took out the key to unlock the door, and a chaotic and noisy voice immediately rushed in his face. Looking around, there were rows of cages of dung crows placed in the bright and messy room. Now there were countless small black eyes staring at him in the cages, and some of them were shouting unscrupulously, "Bald, bald, bald. If I find out which annoying guy taught you this, I will shave his head," he murmured, and suddenly saw a strange raven standing blankly on a table by the window not far away. The petite body made him feel a little strange, but the mark tied to the raven's leg made the bald scholar recognize it at a glance. This bird came from King's Landing. What orders has the king given? Or is it a letter from Grand Maester Purcell? He guessed secretly, stepped closer, grabbed this unusually honest raven in his hand, and pulled out the letter tied to the raven's leg with a strange mentality. He spread out the letter and squinted at it. After a moment, the bald scholar couldn't help frowning. What a ridiculous decision. Shaking his head, he put the letter away, then locked the honest raven in an empty cage, hurriedly left here, and prepared to go to the Duke to report the matter. I wish you all a happy Mid-Autumn festival, a happy meal, and a happy life. P.S. The author can't be happy anymore, because he has to go to the dentist during the holiday. Chapter 138 Useless People. In the bright and fragrant garden of Highgarden, the bald Maester left quietly after finishing his report, while the Duke and Duchess sat face to face at the stone table and talked. The brown-haired Duke of Mace, dressed in gorgeous clothes, was thinking about the letter in his hand. The silver-haired woman sitting opposite him frowned and said, "I don't agree with you taking Renly with you on this voyage, Mace. It's too dangerous." "I don't agree either." The Duke of Mace nodded and said, "But this is His Majesty's request. We can't do anything if we don't agree. The child is less than 7 years old." Lady Ellery reminded him. The brown-haired Duke laughed at this and said, "Maybe the tradition of the Stormlands is to never miss any opportunity to train children from an early age." The silver-haired Lady Ellery sighed. "What a bunch of barbarians." About this, the Duke of Mace coughed dryly and warned, "Spiders don't only weave webs in King's Landing. Some things are better not to be said openly." "Since when have you been so careful in your own garden?" Lady Ellery complained dissatisfiedly. "What else can we say? Isn't it like this during the Mad King's time?" The Duke of Mace sneered. "I originally thought that the spider would be beheaded or driven away after His Majesty Robert came to power, but I didn't expect him to keep his position." He shook his head with some regret. "What a pity. I still think it would be very risky to let Renly go." Lady Ellery turned back to the topic and said, "The child looks healthy, but he was weak and sickly in King's Landing. What if he gets sick on the ship? I'll take the Maester with him." The Duke replied, "If the Maester doesn't work, it's not my fault. Write a letter to ask His Majesty Robert to think carefully, Mace." Lady Ellery suggested. "It's too rash. Write a letter for such a small matter?" The Duke of Mace disagreed with this method. "And even if I write a letter, it won't work. There's no time at all. His Majesty Robert should have left King's Landing by now. Whenever there's a war, he always likes to be at the forefront." At this point, he suddenly remembered that his eldest son had claimed not long ago that he wanted to go with him to see the world. So he said thoughtfully, "You say, since His Majesty Robert is so confident, why don't I take Willis with him, so that he can also gain some experience?" Mace Tyrrell is actually a very generous person, and he always hopes that his eldest son can become a top knight and an excellent ruler. As a ruler, he must understand war. So he is also a little tempted now. "No, Willis must not go with him," the Duchess said without hesitation after hearing this. "One is risky enough. You want to?" We have to take Renly's child with us anyway, so why not let Willis go with us, so that they can have a companion. This is not going out hunting. I think we can basically win this battle, and there will be no danger. The Duke of Mace explained. That won't work either. The brown-haired boy Willis didn't know that his only chance to follow had been ruined by his mother, and now he was persuading two boys of the same age who were visiting the castle. He obviously couldn't imagine that someone had already deviated from his plan and sweeping the snow in front of his own door. In the quiet room, looking at the slightly restrained and thin boy in front of him, Renly was full of sighs. Who would have thought that this little guy who was kidnapped for a golden dragon would be so proficient in unlocking and stealing, pretend to be a letter from King's Landing, and then enter the Maester's tower to listen in under the guidance of Renly, the insider, and sneak to the top floor crow room to send the bird in when the Maester and the servants were not paying attention. A qualified forgery was successfully completed. Although Renly had a way to achieve his goal without this boy named Tob, it would be much simpler this way. Come with me tomorrow morning and steal the bird back. What Renly was thinking did not affect his words. He patted the other person on the shoulder and praised him. Well done. The boy was encouraged and blushed a little. Then he hesitated and said, Sir, can I go with you? He vaguely knew that the Lord might be going out, but he didn't know the specific situation. No. Renly denied it and said, your current task is to stay in the castle and receive training. But my mother said that I have to follow you closely. My lord orders you to stay here now. Renly replied, so the other person lowered his head and muttered, and said no more. The boy's mother was not in the castle at the moment, but was active near Highgarden. The reason was that being a female guard was too eye-catching, and being a maid was too restrained. So it would be better to be an eye and ear outside, so that Renly could be notified as soon as possible if anything happened. Renly thought what she said made sense, so he just let it go. However, he didn't think that having such an informant would help him. Unless someone attacked Highgarden, the heart of the River Bay, or Highgarden rebelled against Baratheon. But even if there were informants at that time, it would be useless. The female bandit that Renly thought was useless was actually very useful if she could report the gossip she heard while traveling a while ago. Of course, even if not, she was actually very useful. For example, at this moment, she suddenly saw a strange woman who was asking about the news of her little master. Under 7 years old, are you sure? In a deserted inn 4 or 5 days away from Highgarden, a woman in a black cloak was talking to the innkeeper's wife, her voice hoarse and strange. I'm not sure about that. I just said that the little duke should be less than 7 years old. The fat proprietress replied. Blue eyes, black hair. Yes, those eyes are beautiful. The fat landlady said with emotion. I have seen many children, but this is the first time I have seen a child with such beautiful eyes. You don't know, ma'am. He even greeted me politely. He said, may the warrior bless your health, ma'am. To be honest, this is the most sincere blessing I have ever heard in my life. Then where does he live now? Where else can it be? The landlady of the inn replied, of course he lives in our Lord Tyrell's castle. Let me say, ma'am, such a beautiful and polite child should live in such a beautiful place. Ordinary people like us are not qualified. The woman nodded, raised her hand to leave a few copper coins, and turned to leave. She had a black hood on her head, so her appearance could not be seen clearly, but when she turned around, a strand of shining silver hair was revealed. Wenda in the corner narrowed her eyes when she saw this, then got up and followed her out. Although she didn't hear any specific purpose, since this person wanted to inquire about her master, it was obviously not a casual question. Wenda was ready to follow and stare at him. Whether it was interrogation or tracking, she would adapt to the situation. However, when she walked out of the hotel, she suddenly found that the strange woman had disappeared. How is this possible? Frowning and scanning the wilderness dirt road in front of the hotel, the female bandit was secretly stunned, but before she could think about it, she suddenly felt a huge impact behind her head, and then her eyes went black, and she knew nothing. Thank you Knight 7 book friend for the 200 reward. Thank you Zyanatang 246 book friend and Palanite book friend for the 100 reward. Chapter 139, Setting Sail in Purple Eyes. The war that broke out suddenly left no room for buffering. On the third day after the royal letter arrived, the knights and soldiers of Highgarden, who were ready to go, boarded the large number of transport ships anchored in the river outside the castle. It was not convenient to wear heavy armor during a naval battle, but if the war went well, there would be a land battle, so the knights still wore their respective plate armor. Even Lord Tyrell was no exception. The core team boarded the ship under the leadership of the majestic Duke of the Reach. As the spectator designated by His Majesty the King, the little Renly was also in the ranks, but before boarding the ship, he faced a problem. "You don't care about our friendship, Renly." The brown-haired boy Willis, who came to see him off, spoke with resentment in his eyes. "It was obviously me who proposed it first. How could you leave me alone and go?" His petition plan was aborted, because the Duchess personally talked to him about this matter the night before, and Willis had to compromise in the end. It was just that he had failed, but the man who was reluctant to join at first actually succeeded. "I can't help it." Renly blinked and replied, "This is all your father's decision." "Then why didn't you include me when you forged the letter?" Willis didn't know Renly's forgery process, but he knew that the sudden letter must be fake, so the result was not difficult to guess. "It would be too strange to include you, and it would cause your father's dissatisfaction." Renly answered seriously, then tiptoed and patted the other's shoulder. "Stay in Highgarden with peace of mind. I wish you a good time in the hunting operation in the near future. I will also tell you the details of the war when I come back. Don't think I can help you hide this." Willis said dissatisfiedly, "I believe you will." Renly replied with a smile, and then ignored the man's expression, stepped onto the ship, and hurried towards the cabin room arranged under the guidance of the guard. At the same time, he began to think silently about this voyage in his mind. Soon, these transport ships anchored on the riverbank will sail along the river called the Manda River towards the west coast. Their destination is to go to the Shield Islands off the west coast, to meet with the Lords of the Bay there. And Renly's accompanying stage is limited to this, or in other words, he has no intention of staying in the fleet all the time. His goal is only to find the rumored Jasper, not to watch the war, and the curse on him also makes him dare not really follow the fleet, to sail in the ocean. Otherwise, if a storm is really summoned, this war will really be lost. On the stone bridge, watching the slowly receding ship, Willis Tyrell felt complicated. On the one hand, he was depressed that he, the initiator, was abandoned in the territory, and on the other hand, he was surprised by Renly's unexpected method. As a precocious noble, Willis was smart and studious. He knew how to go in the future, so he had a clear goal. Although the idea of following the army was due to the curiosity of a teenager, the main purpose was to gain some corresponding knowledge for himself. As for the black-haired boy, although he was a little surprised by his precocity, he also knew that he had no ambition and was lazy. In daily chats, he had no mature plans and ideas for his future career as a lord. He seemed to be no different from those guys who relied on their status to get by. But when the problem arose, the little guy who he thought was just getting by actually left him at a very fast speed, while he, who thought he had mature thoughts, could only stand there and look at the other person's back stupidly. "What's wrong with you, Willis?" The fat boy in green clothes pulled the corner of the brown-haired boy's clothes, who was thinking with his head down, and asked curiously, "Are you reluctant to leave your father?" "Nothing, Garland." The brown-haired boy sighed. "I suddenly feel that I still have a lot to learn." The fat boy seemed to understand this. "You mean learning to identify the stars in the sky? There are so many stars in the sky, so of course you have a lot to learn. Astronomy is just a personal hobby, I mean other aspects." As they were talking, the two brothers and the farewell team were already heading back to the castle. The atmosphere in the castle became a little deserted that night. Without the annoying guy who played the harp and harassed him every day, the brown-haired boy who practiced lance charging felt quite at a loss. So he finished his practice early, before it got dark, wiped his sweat, and walked towards the bachelor's tower. It was not time yet, so he planned to read a book before going to dinner. But before Willis could reach the bachelor's tower, he suddenly saw a stranger appear in his sight. It was a woman who was talking to a maid. She was tall and slender, with her back to him. Her long silver hair draped over a black cloak made Willis subconsciously think of his mother, but when he looked closely, the hair color was not quite the same as his mother's. Who was this? Willis felt curious, and at the same time, as if she noticed his gaze, the woman in the black cloak suddenly turned around and looked at him. It was a delicate yet strange face. At first glance, it looked very young and beautiful. But when he looked at it again, he seemed to see an old man who had experienced many vicissitudes of life. In the dim light, a pair of deep blue eyes seemed to be full of tough aggression, which made the brown-haired boy who had not experienced any storms nervous. But he didn't get nervous for long. The man turned around and walked away quickly, disappearing from his sight in a few breaths. Who was that just now? Willis looked dazed for a moment and finally stopped the maid to ask. It was someone from the lady's family. The maid replied, "My mother's relatives. How come I don't know?" Willis was stunned when he heard it. The maid looked at this with a confused look on her face. "I don't know either, young master, but if she is not from the lady's family, how did she get into the castle?" Willis' heart sank when he heard it, and he asked hurriedly, "What did she say to you?" "Ask about Lord Renly's personality, appearance, temper, and whether he has any quirks," the maid replied. "Besides these, and ask where he went," the maid said, and then asked carefully, "Did I get into trouble, young master?" "No, maybe I didn't know someone from my mother's family was coming," Willis answered comfortingly. He didn't want to cause any panic in the castle or let some gossip spread. The maid felt relieved after hearing this, and the brown-haired boy asked again, "Did she say what her name was?" "No." The maid thought about it and answered, but seeing that her young master frowned, she added, "But I saw that the lady's eyes seemed to be purple." Chapter 140 Arrival and Conversation. The river named Manda flows to the sea in the west, and to the east into the vast land of the Reach. The river is wide and the water flows at a steady pace. It is the largest river in the Reach. The Ironmen once relied on this to sail deep into the Reach and plunder the banks of the Manda River. This trend was not curbed until the ancient Reach royal family armed the 4 sea islands at the western mouth of the river. The 4 islands were later collectively called the Shield Islands. For countless years, they protected the Reach and Highgarden from being invaded by the Ironmen. It was a major strategic location. At dawn, before the morning sun appeared, a large number of troops from Highgarden arrived at Green Shield Island, the closest to the mainland among the Shield Islands. The local ruling family, Chester, solemnly welcomed the Duke of Mace and his party, and also prepared shelter and food. So before dawn, the island was already noisy, with flames reaching the sky. The soldiers and knights who finally arrived at their destination were all very energetic. Mace Tyrrell, the leader, stood on the castle watchtower of the Chester family, and had a heated military discussion with a group of vassals around him. Then when their meeting was over, Renly, who had taken a nap in the castle, suddenly came to the door. Standing on the top floor of the watchtower, the others had already gone down the tower. The black-haired boy said to the tall Duke of Mace with a serious face, "I think my joining is completely a nuisance to you, Lord Mace." "Oh, why do you say that?" The Duke of Mace, who was busy with work, but was impatient to be stopped by a child, was stunned when he heard the words. "It's obvious," Renly said as he spread out his palm and turned it over to indicate. "I'm so young and can't stand the long distance ride. Brother Robert is really inconsiderate." The boy's blunt words seemed a little dissatisfied, and the Duke, who thought the same thing, nodded subconsciously. Then he reacted, coughed dryly, and said, "Maybe His Majesty thinks this war will not be lost, Renly, so he hopes you can learn something from it. But at least he should ask my personal opinion first." The boy frowned and replied. Seeing this, the Duke of Mace thought he was a little scared, so he comforted him. "Don't worry, Renly, there will be no accidents. Stay in the cabin with servants serving you. It's no different than being in Highgarden." "No, Lord Mace," Renly said, "I still think my existence is a trouble, so I thought of a solution." "Solution?" The Duke of Mace was stunned again when he heard this. "What is it?" "Send me a merchant ship," Renly answered with the innocence of a child. "They all say merchant ships can't take part in the war, but I see there are many such ships anchored by the island. They're just sitting there anyway, so why not put me on it? There's no need for me to be with the warships. Merchant ships have no resistance." The Duke laughed after hearing this. "It's safer to be with me. But if a war really breaks out, merchant ships don't need to join the battle." Renly said hopefully. You can ask this ship not to follow the army, but to circle near the coast. In this way, I can be considered to be participating in the war. If there is real danger, we will run to land. No, no. The Duke of Mace shook his head. I can't explain to your brother. If you are so perfunctory, just say I asked for it. Renly said seriously. Or maybe I got sick on the way and had to leave the fleet and return to land for treatment. Robert can't blame you for this, can he? In this way, the Duke was moved when he heard this. It is not convenient to bring a child with you during a war, and this child is the king's brother. If something unexpected happens, it will be troublesome. If we really do this, it seems to be a solution. This child is very sensible, but his ideas are not mature. The Duke laughed secretly and said, I have a better suggestion. Renly. What is it? The boy blinked. You should pretend to be sick now and stay on the island. This way, even if I meet Lord Robert, I will have a legitimate reason to explain your absence. But my brother may very likely come here. Renly said embarrassedly. I'm not really sick. When he sees me so lively, he will be furious. Besides, it's not very safe here. Without waiting for the other party to answer, Renly said, I heard that the Lannister port near Casterly Rock was attacked. If it's not safe here, then other places are even less safe. The Duke of Mace waved his hand and said, if it's really unsafe, you can retreat back to Highgarden. Don't worry, Renly, I will make arrangements before I leave. Renly sighed and then said, okay, my lord, I actually want to go around too. Otherwise, I'll be bored staying in the castle all the time. It's not safe to go around during the war. The Duke of Mace shook his head. It's only in the waters around a few castles along the coast. I don't think there will be any problem. Renly said, if we really encounter the Ironman, the worst that can happen is to run back to the land. Does this kid really think that the Ironman can only move on the sea? The Duke laughed dumbly. I'll think about it, Renly, and give you an answer before I leave. Okay. Renly sighed and said with a little disappointment, may the warriors bless you with victory. The Duke of Mace smiled and thanked him. The boy then turned and walked down the ladder of the watchtower. The disappointment on his face was restrained, and he thought as he walked, think about it, and then give you an answer later. This kind of words is basically a rejection, and Renly was actually mentally prepared for this before he opened his mouth. The ideal situation is that Mace Tyrell agrees to his proposal to send a merchant ship to settle him, so that Renly can freely find his own goal. But obviously the Duke is not stupid enough to leave an important guest carelessly and wander around. But this conversation basically achieved Renly's goal, to stay on this island. That's right, this is actually his purpose, or basic goal. Due to the existence of the curse, Renly cannot go with the main force, so this step is necessary. But at the same time, he doesn't want to give up the original purpose of this trip, to figure out the matter of the sea ghost Jasper. So he has to find a way to leave the island later. Renly has no idea about this for the time being, but he feels that this is not difficult. As for other things, such as his own safety, he is not worried at all. This time, Renly is only worried about the curse. For this war, or this war in the ocean, he does not think that his safety will be threatened. In a sense, the ocean is his home. Renly was thinking about his own affairs here, and over there in the port area of the island, a short-haired woman who was woken up and walked out of the cabin with an impatient face squinted unconsciously when she saw the large group of people, and then thought about it. Thank you to Heath Iced Tea, to Kisaki Love and Favorite Rem for the 500 reward. Thank you to Ziana Tang 246, Changshan Hua and Leaping Guali 303 for the 100 reward. Chapter 141 Sudden Attack. Perhaps there was some new change in the war situation. Less than 2 days after the conversation, the soldiers anchored here boarded the welcoming warships one after another and headed for the northern seas. And Renly was left on the island to pretend to be sick as expected. What should I do next? It's not very realistic to sneak away. Pretending to go back to Highgarden? It doesn't seem appropriate. Let's first understand the basic situation of this island. Standing at the end of the deck, looking at the fleet shadow that was gradually going away, Renly was still thinking. The family that controls the Green Shield Island under his feet is called Chester. The current patriarch, Mabad Chester, is a conservative and sensitive middle-aged noble. Renly had carefully observed him at the banquet to welcome Lord Tyrell. His emblem is a green hand with fingers moving randomly. What secrets are hidden in this? After the war begins, it will basically last for a long time, which allows Renly to think of solutions without being too anxious. The happy waterbird is happy to serve you, young master. Whatever you need, as long as we can do it, we guarantee that it will satisfy you. A flattering voice interrupted the boy's meditation. Turning his head, he saw a short fat round-faced middle-aged man standing beside the boy, patting his chest and smiling. His name is Parlai, and he is the captain of a transport merchant ship. Because of the outbreak of the war, his ship is anchored in the port of Green Shield Island with some other merchant ships, and has been requisitioned. Although Renly is pretending to be sick on the island, it does not mean that he is under house arrest. Although he has not figured out a way to leave here yet, it does not affect his coming to inquire about the news. After all, it is said that the so-called sea ghost was first discovered by these merchants. So he came to this ship now. Of course, he is not the only one who came. There are several guards not far away, and there are many soldiers in the port outside the ship who glance at him from time to time. I want to go to the fairy city to have a look. Can you take me there? Renly asked after hearing this with a blink of an eye. That won't do, young master. There's a war going on over there. It's very dangerous. Captain Slee shook his head and then looked at the pretty little guy curiously, but didn't ask any more questions. The real identity of Renly was only known by Earl Chester himself and the guards left by Duke Tyrell on the island. Others didn't know it, mainly for his safety. After all, the identity of the king's younger brother was too special. So Captain Slee only knew that the man who ran up was a young master from a noble family, and he didn't know anything else. He didn't have much curiosity about this. After all, some things in aristocratic families can be very complicated, and it's usually not good to dig deep. How about we go to Old Town? There are many interesting places there. The fat captain suggested, and he eagerly hoped that the little guy would agree with him, so that his ship could be out of the war. Unfortunately, the boy's next sentence made him feel disappointed. Forget it, I'm not going there yet. Renly shook his head and changed the subject, asking, I heard that there's a sea ghost named Jasper around Fairy City. Do you know about this, Captain Buxy? I know a little bit. Renly was delighted by the fat captain's words, but then he frowned. But basically, it's all the same news as usual, such as a scary look, coming and going like a ghost. Young master, forgive me for being blunt, although there are many strange things on the sea, most of them are nonsense from sailors who have been holding back for a long time. After all, this kind of thing is best used to fool prostitutes. Apart from these, Renly asked unwillingly, I heard that he always asks about a place called White Gull Village. I think it was a place name made up by a sailor. Captain Puxy replied with a smile, I've been a merchant for so many years, and I've never heard of this place. Maybe it's on land? It seems that I still need to find it myself. Renly sighed secretly when he heard this, but then he suddenly felt as if someone was looking at him. He turned his head and saw a tall woman in coarse cloth leaning against the mast not far away. She smiled at the boy when she saw him looking at her. The woman looked to be in her 20s, with short silver hair and a heroic look, but her expression seemed a little awkward. Strange. The boy felt that the woman seemed a little abnormal, but he couldn't tell why. So he asked Captain Slee beside him, who is that person? That's Miss Tiana. She originally wanted to go to Cliff City on my ship. The fat captain sighed and said, it's a pity that the war broke out. We can't get close to there at all. She can only wait like this. Alas, I'm a businessman who keeps his word, but I can't complete the transaction after receiving the money. It's a shame. Renly curled his lips and said nothing. After a brief contact, he felt that this person was actually a bit slick and didn't seem like a decent person. After thinking about it carefully, he still didn't feel anything was wrong, so Renly simply gave up. After chatting for a few words, he turned around and walked towards the bottom of the ship with a group of guards not far away, thinking about whether to go to other ships to ask. But before he took a few steps, his steps suddenly stopped, because the woman who made him feel strange just now stepped forward to stop them. Miss, what do you want? Seeing this, the guard hurriedly stepped forward and blocked the boy behind him. It's important. the other party replied, and after taking a few steps closer, he suddenly hit the guard with a fierce headbutt, causing him to scream and retreat. At the same time, the long sword on his waist was quickly taken away by the woman. Then she moved her feet slightly to the side, deftly avoiding the sword attack of another guard, and at the same time, she waved the weapon in her hand seemingly casually, and the sword directly swept across the other's palm holding the weapon. So a touch of blood splashed, and the sword of the senior guard from the Tyrell family fell to the ground without holding it. The other guards around had already rushed forward, but the incident happened so suddenly that there was a big loophole in their formation, so that the woman nimbly leaned over and dodged, and actually rushed out of the encirclement directly. Then she took a step with her long legs and directly crossed a distance to Renly. There were 2 guards protecting the boy on both sides. One of them saw this, and clenched the long shield in his hand, while the other waved his sword to block him and roared, "Come back to help, enemy!" The sharp cry stopped abruptly. The attacker used a backhand feint to trick him into revealing a flaw, and then slapped the sword in his hand on his forehead, so that the guard fell to the ground in a daze. Then the woman raised her leg, and kicked the shield guard fiercely. The fierce force rushed away, and the shield made a clanging sound. The shield guard couldn't help but stagger back, so there was a momentary gap in the protection around the boy. Everything happened so fast that it seemed that in just a few seconds, this guy had broken through and entered in front of him. Renly was standing there, stunned as he watched all this. He looked at the long legs in front of him that were much longer than his own short legs, and simply raised his hands in surrender. "What do you want to do?" "I'll cooperate." He blinked and said, "Just don't be violent. You're an interesting kid." The other party chuckled at this, and at the same time reached out and grabbed the back of his neck. Facing the large number of guards who gathered around again, he shouted, "Now, if you don't send me to Cliff City, I'll kill him." After these words fell, the boy who was secretly fiddling with a bronze ring on his thumb suddenly became completely obedient. Chapter 142 Tayana. When the news of Lord Renly being captured came, the Earl of Greenshield Island, Chester, was hiding in the warehouse of his kitchen and doing something unspeakable with a skinny young female kitchen helper. The servants had to look for him for a long time before they found him. Then, when he heard the news, the impatient and irritable Earl Chester was immediately like someone poured a basin of cold water on his forehead, and he turned off the fire directly. How could he be captured? "There are so many guards around that child?" the Earl asked with trembling lips, but the servant obviously couldn't answer his question. So the middle-aged Earl hurried to the scene of the crime with disheveled steps. At this time, a large number of fleets participating in the war had just left, and the people on the island were still busy finishing and cleaning. Most people had no idea what happened at the port, but they only vaguely knew what seemed to have happened. So when they saw their master running towards the port in dishevel, everyone was quite curious about it. "What happened? I heard someone was causing trouble at the port. Who is so bold? Could it be the Ironborn? How is this possible?" There were so many people coming to Highgarden before that few people noticed that there was a child following them. Even if they noticed, they obviously couldn't guess his true identity. After all, there were many of his vassals with Lord Tyrell. Although others didn't know, Lord Chester certainly couldn't be unaware, so he was full of anxiety at this time, even more anxious than his own son being captured. The port area had been blocked by the garrison soldiers at this time. After the Lord Earl arrived, he brought a group of people to negotiate, but the woman who captured the little duke was very tough, claiming that she would not let go of the prisoner unless a ship was sent to send her to the vicinity of the Rock City in the west. Lord Chester used coercion, inducement, and even begging, but it was ineffective. In the end, he could only honestly do what the other party ordered: send a ship to see him off. "Excuse me, Lord Chester, but we can't explain to the Duke if you do this." Until the merchant ship left the port and slowly went away, the captain of the Tyrell Guard beside the Earl said with a gloomy face, "I can't bear the consequences of losing Duke Renly, and I don't think you can either." Don't worry, of course I won't do anything." Lord Chester wiped the cold sweat on his face while saying, and smiled at the captain of the guard, "Sailors, cooks, servants, rowers, all the crew members are my people. There will always be a chance to rescue our little duke. Don't worry, I can't let it go, sir." The captain of the guard was also born into a noble family, so he was not afraid of the man in front of him at all. Before the young duke was captured, he was surrounded by your people, but that woman succeeded. I wonder why such a dangerous woman would sneak into your port. And if I remember correctly, your people were closer than mine at that time. After hearing this, Earl Chester's smile faded, and he said coldly, do I need to remind you? Your dereliction of duty is much more serious than mine. The atmosphere was silent for a while, and the two finally looked at each other, and tacitly did not continue the topic. What should we do now? Block the news first. The middle-aged Earl gritted his teeth and said, we must rescue the child, and never let this matter affect the Duke's war. I said it long ago that Green Shield Island may not be safe, but unfortunately no one believes me. In the swaying captain's room, the black-haired boy sitting at the table said with inexplicable emotions, and while speaking, he glanced at the woman who was sitting on a chair not far away, and wiping the long sword in her hand. Otherwise I wouldn't have been caught by you. Naive boy. The woman said without turning her head, her eyes focused on the newly acquired half-hand sword in her hand. If I want, I can catch you, even if you hide in the castle. She looked like a heroic young woman with a wild fighting style, but the posture she sat there at this time seemed upright and elegant, which made Renly vaguely recall the teachings of the Duchess when he was in Highgarden. This also made him very curious about the woman in front of him. Are you a noble? He asked. No one is more noble than me, the woman answered as a matter of course. Then why do you want to do such a thing? The boy continued to ask. Because I want to. The other party answered and glanced at him sideways. Now shut your mouth. Don't speak without my order. Why? The black-haired boy blinked and asked, are you annoyed now? If you say another word, I will cut your tongue or chop off your fingers. Okay, I'll shut up. Renly answered, then turned over and sat on the chair behind the table, pretending to be honest. His target was the fairy city, and the cliff city the other party mentioned was also in that sea area. So even though he was captured, this was exactly what Renly wanted. So he didn't plan to break the current situation. He just tried to test the other party's character. But he didn't expect that the woman who called herself Tiana would be interested in him because of his honesty, or curious about this little guy who was not panicked at all, even when he was kidnapped. She looked at the boy's face with her head tilted, paying special attention to his beautiful eyes and charcoal black hair, and asked, whose kid are you? Renly kept silent, and the other party raised an eyebrow. Answer my question, or I will. You told me not to talk anymore, the boy said innocently. He knew that he didn't act like a normal child, but it was obvious that he couldn't cry, so he had to look tough. At the same time, this would make it easier to get closer. I'll let you answer now, the other party said toughly. This question was not easy to answer. Before he knew the true identity of this woman, Renly felt that, no matter which family he mentioned, he would be exposed. After all, she did not look like a commoner. But if he told the truth, so the boy remained silent for a while. However, when he found that the other party was impatient, he sighed and said, I'm from the Tully family. The Tully family of Hornhill? The woman asked, her deep blue eyes narrowed unconsciously. Why did you come to Green Shield Island? I came to see the world. Who is your father? Renly's mind moved when he heard this, and he said, Randyll Tully, the head of the Tully family in the present? The woman asked. Yes. The boy replied, he is very powerful. The woman nodded when she heard this. Samwell Tully is also a well-known figure, she said, looking at Renly thoughtfully for a few times, and turned back to continue polishing the sword. Renly did not speak again, but fell into deep thought. The Tully family of Hornhill is one of the most powerful families in the Reach. The current head of the family, Randyll Tully, dealt a heavy blow to the powerful Baratheon during Robert's rebellion, so much so that Robert had to allow his own Storm's End to be besieged, and fled to a town in the Riverlands in a panic, hiding like a dog that had lost its home. So, Randyll Tully is a very famous person in the whole of Westeros, and his fame in the Reach is even not inferior to that of his feudal lord, Mace Tyrell. Similarly, many people, at least the nobles in the Reach, also know that Randyll Tully's eldest son was born just over a year ago. However, the woman in front of him didn't realize this at all. Looking at the tall back of the person sitting on the chair, Renly was thoughtful. At least, He can now be sure that the woman in front of him, who is suspected to be from a noble family, is not a native of the reach, and the Samwell Tully mentioned by the other party. Renly was actually very familiar with this name, because no matter in the past life or now, he had known the person behind this name. In the previous life, there was a cowardly fat man named Samwell, who later became a university scholar inexplicably. And that person was actually the real eldest son of Randyll Tully, who should be only a little over 1 year old now. So it was impossible for the person the woman was talking about to be him. Renly guessed correctly that the other party should be talking about Samwell Tully in the era of Venus Eye, that is, the patriarch of the Tully family in the era of his last copy. He had made great military exploits and killed countless Dornishmen and was called a barbarian. It's just, although there is nothing special about using ancient people to praise contemporary people, the tone of the other party's speech made Renly feel very strange, as if, compared with Randyll Tully, she was more familiar with the Earl of Hornhill, who lived more than 200 years ago. Thank you to the book friend Pure Domestic Love My China for the 2000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Supreme Lord Admiral Spear for the 200 reward. Thank you to the book friend Ziana Tang 246, the book friend Kindian, and the book friend Cheyenne Izifan for the 100 reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143 Ignorant People. The tall woman named Tiana was a very strange person. Renly came to this conclusion on the third day of being captured. As an important captive, this woman had to be with Renly all the time. Not only did they sleep in the same room, but she also had to stand behind him and stare at him when he went outside to pee on the deck. Although this made Renly quite uncomfortable, it also allowed him to observe this female kidnapper closely. First of all, she had a very bad temper and was very conservative. Apart from little brats like Renly, any male on the ship would get furious and beat him up if he stared at her chest a little more. But sometimes she would touch herself when no one was paying attention, and then her expression would become very strange. Secondly, she was also an alcoholic. Although the people on the ship were enemies, not friends, she would still drink heavily at night, not afraid of getting drunk and delaying business. Of course, before she drank, she would let Renly, the hostage, take a sip to prevent it from being poisonous. She could drink a lot, but she also got drunk a few times. It was only because she had pretended to be drunk to lure the people on the boat to rescue her, and even kicked several people off the boat. After that, there was no one on the boat who was brave enough. But in fact, Renly had several opportunities to kill her if he wanted to. Finally, her sitting etiquette exposed her good upbringing, but she lacked common sense, or in other words, she lacked the knowledge that a noble should have. For example, she had only a vague understanding of the current noble leaders in the River Reach, and even the entire Westeros continent. Not to mention the Tully family that Renly pretended to be, even the current royal family Baratheon. She only knew one Robert, and that was because the other party was the king. She also didn't know about the former Targaryen Mad King, but when Renly told her about it, she had a sneer on her face. Yes, Renly told her. The kidnapper Tiana knew nothing about many aspects of Westeros, but she was eager to learn about it. There was nothing in the first 2 days, but in the following days, she asked Renly to tell her about some situations in various places in the Seven Kingdoms. Maybe it was because she was bored, or maybe there was another purpose. Renly didn't think there was any need to keep these secrets, and he could also use this to get questions, so he didn't hesitate to tell her. Whatever Tiana asked, he would tell her. After a while, the two of them were not so alienated. Although the other party was surprised at the erudition of this child, she was more willing to accept it, and was also very satisfied with such an honest captive, so she didn't realize that her attitude had changed a lot compared to the initial toughness. And Renly was also very satisfied with this female kidnapper who had a suspicious identity, but the same goal and a good temper. Until the 7th night of being captured, he was knocked unconscious by surprise, and when he woke up again, he found that his environment was no longer the sea, but a shallow beach. There was still a dull pain behind his head, but Renly had no time to care about it. Instead, he asked the woman who was carrying him on her back with a look of surprise. "How did you get ashore? There is a war on the sea now, and there is no one on the ship. Who is my man? There may be a large group of pursuers following me." The woman in front of her, who was hugged by the boy's neck, heard this and said without turning her head, "Do you think I'm a fool? Why do you have to go by sea instead of sneaking ashore? Then why didn't you go by land at the beginning?" Renly frowned and asked, "Why did you go to Green Shield Island? There was no war at the beginning." The other party sneered and said, "Otherwise, why would it be so troublesome?" As she said that, she walked to a small path in front of the beach, stopped, and then put Renly down, and let him walk by himself. "But it's good now. I'd rather have you." She smiled as she spoke. Renly sighed and touched the back of his head, which was still aching. He looked back, and found a small boat at the end of the beach rising and falling with the tide, but there was no sign of the boat in the distance. "Are you still going to the rock?" The boy turned around and asked. "Of course." The other party said without hesitation, "But first I have to get a horse, otherwise I'll have to go." She turned around, and continued on her way. The boy followed her, staring at the tall woman in front of him. Some thoughts in his mind surged one after another, but he suppressed them all in the end. Then he asked, "Why do you want to go to the rock? Are you related to the Westerling family there?" "Relatives." The other party paused when he heard the words, and then suddenly turned his head to look at the boy, and asked a seemingly unrelated question. "Meager Targaryen, did he really not leave even a single offspring?" "Meager?" Renly was stunned when he heard this, but he still answered, "Not even one. The later Targaryen bloodline is basically the young queen's lineage. The eldest queen's lineage was completely extinct after Meager's death." "Why?" The other party couldn't help asking. "He married 7 wives. How could he not leave a single child?" "It's 6, not 7. Renly corrected. "So, why? Maybe there's something wrong with him." Renly answered smoothly. The other party couldn't help but touch her chest when she heard this, with a look of doubt on her face, but the next sentence she heard shocked her whole body. "But it is said that the reason why Meagerai had no children was actually that his women were poisoned by one of his queens." "Who?" "It's," Renly said, and suddenly paused, then looked at the other party thoughtfully. "Tyanna, the same name as yours, Tyanna of Tower City, from Pentus." The other party didn't speak again, turned around and continued walking, and the expression on his face became unusually gloomy for some reason. Renly followed her, and tactfully stopped talking. He also fell into deep thought. The woman in front of him obviously did not come from a commoner family. Even in terms of etiquette, ordinary children of small nobles could not do it, but she did not know the common sense that nobles should have. In other words, what she knew was very strange. She knew the surnames of lords from all over the 7 kingdoms, but knew nothing about the helmsmen of the current era. At first, Renly thought that this might be because the other party came from outside the continent of Westeros, such as the free trade city-states in the East continent, so she knew only a little about these things, and this could also match the hair color and eye color of the person in front of him. After all, there are actually many people with such features in the East continent. However, at this moment, another idea suddenly popped up in his heart. Could this woman named Tyanna be an ancient person? An ancient person who was reborn in the modern times? After several days of continuous contact, many clues came to his mind at this time, making him more suspicious. It is obvious that he is of noble origin, but he is completely out of touch with the times. Not only does he not know much about the current nobles, but he also knows nothing about the deeds of many kings of the Targaryen dynasty before him. Yet, he is very concerned about this aspect. Renly can easily accept the concept of time travel and rebirth. After all, he himself is a perfect example. However, in this world of A Song of Ice and Fire, there are ancient people who traveled through time, which is worth his deep thought. Thinking of this, Renly looked at his left wrist unconsciously with doubt in his eyes. One of the known abilities of the mark is replacement, and he has always been curious about where the source of this replacement comes from. Is it around him, or somewhere else in the world? But why can't it be the other end of time? After all, he himself has the ability to travel through history, and he remembers that there are people in that drama who can observe and even interfere with history. But this was not right. Even though it had worked many times, Renly had paid attention every time. If a living person really ran in, there was no way he had not noticed. With his mind racing, Renly suddenly raised his head and asked the woman walking in front of him, "Are you the Tiana? The Tiana from Tower City? From 200 years ago?" As soon as the words fell, the other party paused unconsciously. Chapter 144. Admit. It was only dawn, and the sky was dim. Standing on this deserted road not far from the sea breeze kept blowing, mixed with the coldness of the coming winter, which gave people goosebumps. After the boy finished speaking, the silver-haired woman suddenly paused, and then turned back to look at him. "What did you say, Tiana?" Looking up at the heroic woman with a tense face, Renly said without hesitation, "I mean, you are the Tiana from more than 200 years ago, the third wife of Megarai, whom he met in Pentus, when he was exiled to the free trade city for bigamy." The woman's reaction had already made Renly guess, and although it seemed very direct to reveal a person's secret, he was already quite irritated because of the sudden landing, and now he was even more eager to confirm whether his guess was correct, so he didn't care so much. "Why do you say that?" After hearing this, the tall short-haired woman narrowed her eyes and said in an inexplicable tone, "From 200 years ago. How exaggerated. You love to talk in your sleep when you are drunk." Renly interrupted her seriously and said to the other party with a stunned expression, "Several times, you mentioned some strange things, such as 'Why am I here? How is this possible? 200 years, this world is not real,' and so on. So you think I'm a person from 200 years ago? Because of this dream talk?" "Yes." Renly nodded and then asked curiously, "Are you really a person from 200 years ago?" In fact, dream talk is basically nonsense, but Renly can't say that this is his own analysis, which seems too threatening. He currently positions himself as a precocious child who is familiar with history and the situation in Westeros, with strange and naive thoughts. He doesn't want this female robber to have any other associations. After hearing this, the other party didn't say anything, but just stared at Renly with her deep blue eyes, with very complicated emotions in her eyes. Is that vigilance? Was it rejection? Relief? Or joy? Without giving Renly any more time to watch, the tall woman suddenly squatted down, looked at the boy at eye level, took a deep breath, and said seriously, "I'm indeed not from this era." She seemed to expect the boy to give her some feedback when she spoke, and Renly's pupils did dilate after hearing this accurate news. This seemed to make her quite satisfied, so she continued, "As you heard, I came from more than 200 years ago, to be exact, 242 years ago, and my name is not Tiana." But at this moment, she seemed a little hesitant, but perhaps she thought of something. Her face gradually became firm, and finally gritted her teeth, and said a word. "It's Mega Targaryen." After the words fell, the boy in front of him couldn't help but take a half step back, and his eyes widened. "This is impossible. Mika is a man. Is this what you want to say?" The boy nodded hurriedly after hearing the words, and the horrified expression on his face was not disguised at all. It was completely from the heart. "This is the will of the gods." The woman who called herself Mika said with a serious face, "Virgin Mary, young girl, old woman. I can't guess the true face of the gods, but yes, they turned me into this appearance, and they also made me come to this world full of mistakes." The boy was confused again when he heard this, but the other party did not stop talking. Instead, he gritted his teeth and said, "Dragons are the treasure of the whole world in the eternal truth. They are impossible to be truly extinct. All conspirators who attempt to destroy them will sooner or later bear the wrath of the return of the dragon. The cowardly Aenys family was a mistake from the very beginning. The Iron Throne didn't even last for 300 years in their hands. Orys Baratheon was just a dog raised by his father. What qualifications do his descendants have to kill their master and sit on the Iron Throne? Those stupid bastards in the Seven Kingdoms actually support him. Where is the reason? Where is the law?" There were many flaws in her words, but Renly didn't want to refute them at this moment. Instead, he asked quickly after the other party finished speaking, "Did the gods send you here?" I mean, if there really are gods facing the serious looking woman in front of him. The boy carefully organized his words and then tentatively said, if there really are gods, wouldn't you have angered them a long time ago? Angered? Meager was stunned when he heard this and then remembered his reputation in this era. So he frowned and said unhappily, I don't know how those meesters framed me, but I can't be crazy to that extent. Besides, the existing history is completely different from what I have experienced. For example, she paused, frowned, and thought of an elder with a weird personality in her memory. For example, my brother Renly's mother, Queen Rhaenys, did not die in Dawn at all. For another example, I did start the trial of the Seven with the church, but the initiator was not a member of the church, but a traitor of the son of a bitch Baratheon. Her face was full of resentment and unwillingness when she said this, and this remark made Renly understand immediately. The source of this ancient time traveler in front of him was obviously the historical copy world that he had changed, and the reason why he was able to travel through it. The boy's eyes unconsciously glanced at his left wrist covered by his sleeve, and the suspicion not long ago was now completely confirmed. The replacement source of this mark was not the surrounding world, nor was it the other end of time, but the historical copy that he had changed. Thinking of this, he was relieved. After all, this mark came from that world. But why is this the case? Why did Meager in front of him become a woman? How did she appear in this world? If it was really because of this mark, why didn't he find it? Did you win that trial? Renly couldn't help asking. In our history, you won that trial. This made the other party's face suddenly become very strange, and a trace of hatred appeared on her face that was more serious than the one mentioned before about the Baratheon traitor. No, a despicable guy used poison during the trial, and I accidentally fell into his trap. Then what? Renly, the despicable guy, asked without any strange expression. Then what happened? He was eager to know this, or this was the most important thing, but unfortunately the other party did not answer his question, but looked at the little guy in front of him with a serious expression. Do you believe that I'm Meager? You don't look like you are lying. Renly nodded. In fact, he was sure of this after combining various clues. Otherwise normal people would only regard the other party as a crazy fool after hearing all this. So how do you feel? The woman asked again, and her voice sounded a little nervous for some reason. Seeing a king who should have existed in the history books and turned into a woman. How do you feel about this? Feeling? Renly blinked when he heard it. Thank you to the Supreme Lord Admiral Spear for the 500 reward. Thank you to the Kans_Luaksu for the 300 reward. Thank you to the Xyanatang 246, Waxumian Iron, Zelnaga and Lipinguali 303 for the 100 reward. Chapter 145, Meager. Since coming to this world, Meager Targaryen has never had a happy day. When she first arrived, she just crushed 2 pigs to death, and the bitch Baron Caswell led people to chase her everywhere. At first, because of the changes in her body and environment, she suppressed her anger and wanted to return to the Red Keep in King's Landing. But later she heard that the Targaryen royal family was replaced by Baratheon. She couldn't help it anymore and directly revealed her identity to call on the people loyal to Targaryen to resist this inexplicable King Baratheon. As a result, not only did no one support her, but some people even laughed at her for being a crazy woman! Exclamation mark. She is a man, not a crazy person. She is the ruler of the 7 kingdoms, a dragon rider, and a bastard who doesn't even have the right to lick her toes. She was originally full of anger about this, but later she realized that this world is no longer the era she lived in, but more than 200 years later, those lords and nobles who were once loyal to her have long turned into a handful of dust, and their descendants don't know who she is at all. So she immediately lost her fighting spirit. The change of gender seemed to make her brain not as sharp as before, and the change of times made her very confused. Baron Caswell of Bitterbridge kept chasing after her. At first, she thought that it was not necessary to chase him so closely for just 2 pigs. Later, she found out that the old man with yellow teeth actually liked her. Question mark? The reason why she didn't deal with the old man was just because she didn't have the heart to deal with it, not because she didn't have the ability. So when she thought it was necessary to deal with the disgusting old bastard, she did it. But even though she later raided Baron Castle's team and cut off his penis with her own hands, she still felt empty and confused. Who should I be? Where should I go? What should I do? Ideals, ambitions, enemies, relatives, rights, desires. The earth-shaking changes made everything far away from her, and even she had problems with the most basic self-care. She had also wanted to find out why she had changed like this, but when she thought about it carefully, the last thing she remembered was the fist of the damned church knight wearing a steel glove. Then she woke up again, and was already here. So this clue ended here. The strange world seemed to be full of dangers. It was painful for her to find that her actions and even thoughts were becoming more and more feminine. After castrating the old bastard, she also plundered a small amount of money that was enough to ensure basic living. So with this money, she spent a period of time drinking, eating meat and sleeping in a hotel. But treating a noble like this was not without consequences. Soon after, she was found. Fortunately, the training she had received since childhood on Dragonstone allowed her to maintain the most basic vigilance even in her decadent state, so she escaped the encirclement and suppression against herself. Then she escaped the second, third, and fourth games in succession. Then she suddenly realized that what she had lost was not limited to the crown and the second child, but also the most basic thing that she had taken for granted in the past, the status of a noble. If I'm not a noble, the lords of Westeros can hang me or drown me if they want. Even if I'm innocent, no one will come to appeal for justice. If I'm not a noble, I can only hang with a bunch of stupid mudlegs. Occasionally, I will meet one or two noble masters on the roadside. The eyes that look at me are either mocking contempt or hypocritical pity. Anyway, they are not equal, so naturally they don't look up to me as before. If I'm not a noble, I don't have an industry that can keep me well fed and clothed. I can only wander around, work for the nobles, be a farm worker, or be a wilderness bandit, thinking about how to get the money for the next meal every day. If I'm not a noble, I'm not even qualified to propose the most basic trial by combat. If I'm not a noble, am I still a human being? Question mark? After realizing this, Meaghan gnashed his teeth for a while, and then set himself the first goal, to get a large sum of money, and then run to the East Continent where there is no noble class to buy property, and become a rich man for the time being, and then it will not be too late to consider the future, after she thoroughly understands this era. Yes, it is better to run away. Although she is arrogant, she is not a fool. After losing her dragon and Targaryen identity, she has a clear mind. She knows that women can't even become knights, let alone become nobles again. Although she is extremely disgusted with the usurped Baratheon dynasty, she has not yet adapted to the changes in her body, let alone the lofty ambition of correcting the chaos. So she decided to go to the Westerly Rock City. The nobles in the Westerly Rock City are generally rich, and the Westerling family in the Rock City is the best among them. In fact, with her skills, it is not difficult to find a wealthy noble and kidnap him to extort a sum of money, but such behavior will not only cause a wanted warrant, but also the money obtained will not be much. Cliff Rock was different. As far as she knew, the Westerling family there was easier to bully, and relying on her past as prime minister, she also knew a secret passage leading to the gold mine under Cliff Rock. As long as she got there, she could get a large sum of money without anyone noticing, and there would be basically no trouble. Meaghan was very satisfied with this plan. However, she was in the reach at that time. If she wanted to go to the coastal castle, she had to walk a long mountain road, which was particularly time consuming, so she decided to take a more convenient sea route. Everything went smoothly at the beginning. Relying on the money she robbed along the way, she collected the corresponding travel expenses, and some merchant ships agreed to take her on board. However, the war that broke out later forced her to stop on the desolate island of Greenshield Island, and it was a long way to go before she could continue sailing. At first, she could still tolerate it, or rather, without the dragon, and after she became a woman, her patience became more and more sufficient, but then she suddenly realized a very serious problem during a casual chat. That is, the current Cliff City was no longer the Cliff City in her impression. The gold mines below it had long been mined out, and the Westerling family in the castle had been in decline for a long time. For a moment, Meager was annoyed, so she resolutely changed her mind. Why go to Cliff City, consider being wanted, kidnap and extort, and then run away as soon as possible? So she did it. The process was very smooth, even a little too smooth. Before she could figure out the kidnapping target, a noble child swaggered to the ship she was on and asked questions. Such a good opportunity fell from the sky. Of course she had to seize it, and relying on her extraordinary skills, she did seize this opportunity. Then with the captive in hand, she said that the lord of the island was what he was, providing the ship, the people, and the money, just so that she could keep her promise. This made Meager suddenly realize that the identity of this child who was kidnapped casually in his hand seemed not so simple. Later inquiries made her confirm this point. The eldest son of the Tully family, the son of the current Earl of Hornhill, his father was an important general in the Riverland and had a high reputation. Her original idea changed because of this. She wanted to play a big game. So her original route was inconvenient, and her goal was completely different from before. Of course, she couldn't tell this to the child in front of her. Although this little guy didn't look big, he was really smart and his mind was unstable. Not only did he not show much tension after being kidnapped, but he seemed to be looking forward to the city of Cliff. Meager was very curious about what the boy was thinking, but she was actually too lazy to care about what a captive thought specifically, or in other words, after understanding the records of herself in this era, she had been thinking about this for a while, and finally came to the conclusion that the group of meesters in Old Town were really nothing. How could she be that kind of crazy and irrational person? However, despite denying the history of this world, she still attached great importance to the life trajectory of herself, especially why she didn't leave any offspring. The result made her feel very bad. Just when she was immersed in this emotion, the other party suddenly saw through her identity, or saw through her origin. She was full of surprise and even panicked for a moment, but when she found that there was only a child in front of her, this panic was suppressed, and another thought arose in her heart. The boy obviously didn't expect that she was actually a man, but if she told him her true identity, how would he see her? In other words, if she made this identity public, how would people of this era see her? Still regard her as a woman, or? A certain expectation in her heart made her impulse very strong, so she did it. The other party was really full of surprise and doubt as she imagined, but after her explanation, the child's expression did not show any abnormality, as if it was not so difficult to accept. It's not that hard to accept. A feeling of excitement grew from the bottom of her heart. Mika, who had been desperate for her gender, seemed to see some new hope at this moment. But in order to be more confident, she couldn't help asking the other party how he felt after hearing all this. The boy hesitated for a while after hearing this, but he didn't remain silent. I feel that the world seems to have become different, he said. It sounded the same, as if he hadn't said it, but judging from the look on the boy's face, he obviously didn't regard himself as a monster, which made Mika, who was originally full of depression and depression, suddenly feel very happy. So she couldn't help laughing, got up and stepped forward, and her fighting spirit was replenished again. She praised from the bottom of her heart, "You are such a good little guy. I'm a little reluctant to send you to the Iron Islands." Iron Islands? The boy who was frowning and thinking behind him was stunned when he heard this, and then couldn't help asking, "Aren't you going to the Rock City?" The woman's smile froze. Chapter 146. Hurrying on the road. The originally relaxed atmosphere suddenly became solemn because of this sentence. Facing the question from the black-haired boy, the short-haired woman paused for a moment, then narrowed her eyes and said, "Of course, I will send you to exchange for a bigger reward." The words could not be taken back after they were spoken, and it was a bit embarrassing for her to let it slip for a while, but Meg didn't care about it that much. Even if she told the truth, what would happen? It would just make the little guy less honest, but she didn't think that a child being dishonest would bring any consequences, although the child was quite smart. However, to her surprise, the boy's expression did not change after hearing the words. He just said "oh," and then said nothing. "Aren't you afraid?" Mika raised his eyebrows and asked, "Everyone in the Iron Islands is your father's enemy. At most, I can pay a ransom." Renly replied, "It won't cost me a piece of meat." Defeated noble captives can indeed be exchanged for ransom, but this is the rule of Westeros. In the Iron Islands, this rule may not work well, especially under the premise that the other party's father is a powerful figure in the Riverage. This child is smart, but he is still too naive, Meager thought secretly after hearing this. This is normal. A child who has been raised in a castle with no worries about food and clothing since childhood. His understanding of the outside world is mostly limited to history books and the mouths of bards. He probably thinks that everything outside is beautiful. Inexplicably feeling a little emotional, the tall woman no longer paid attention to the boy's reaction and turned around to continue walking. "You are a very interesting boy. Maybe I will change my mind," she said. Renly glanced at her back and curled his lips. What he said just now was just to end the topic as soon as possible. In fact, he certainly couldn't be so naive. Instead, he thought that the person in front of him, Mika, seemed to take things for granted. For example, how could she go to the Iron Islands? Who would she trade with? Without anything to prove her identity, how could the trading partner believe her? And, why would they trade with you? Wouldn't it be better to rob her? Renly didn't know what the other party was thinking. Maybe he had a plan, but it didn't matter, because he didn't think he would be sent to the Iron Islands. Although he felt a little unsafe after leaving the sea, the overall situation was still under his control. The person in front of him wanted to send him to the Iron Islands in exchange for benefits, but she obviously didn't think that, as long as she reached the area where the sea was, the choice would no longer be in her hands. Renly was not worried about this. Relatively speaking, he was more concerned about another thing. That is, what has this world become? The gender of the person in front of him surprised him, but apart from this, her origin was already very obvious. It was the last copy he experienced. From this association, the origin of the followers of the son of the drowned god in the Iron Islands seems to be clear. The son of the drowned god of that era launched a second rebellion, but was beheaded and then presented to the weak King Inez. However, the death of the son of the drowned god does not mean that all his followers were wiped out. So if the mark on his hand can really cause people from that copy world to travel through, it is not incomprehensible that such a group of people appeared. But why does this kind of travel cause sex change? Is there some kind of power in the process of traveling through? Or is there any other reason? Chaos. Walking in the dim light, the boy touched his left wrist and pursed his lips in silence. This chaos mark came from his completion of the task of guiding the son of chaos to the right path. At first, he thought that this mark was so special that it might be because the system on his body had given him the corresponding power. However, thinking back to many previous tasks, the rewards obtained were closely related to the completion of the event. So is there another possibility? Renly couldn't help but recall the face of a girl with a snub nose and freckles. The other's intimate smile seemed to be still vivid in his mind, but when he thought about it again, the feeling was completely different. What exactly is the son of chaos? This question came from the bottom of his heart and occupied most of his thoughts, but as usual, he still couldn't figure out the answer to this question. But I should at least understand what has happened. Muttering to himself, the boy looked up at the figure of the woman walking in front of him. The words of the woman in front of him, that the gods sent her here, were completely fooling people, but there was no doubt that she was from that world. So no matter what, it was his goal to get everything the other person knew. Judging from the other person's existence, that world could not be a place that would remain motionless or disappear as soon as he left, so he really wanted to know what happened there after he left. The beach where the two people, one big and one small, landed was actually not too far beyond the scope of Green Shield Island, and there might even be only a sea area between them and the island, so they were still within the scope of the Riverage. Although she didn't know if there were any pursuers behind her, the cautious silver-haired woman wisely did not take the coastal road near the coastline, but took a small path with many twists and turns. Fishing villages, woods, streams, fertile fields, farmhouses, manors, orchards. As she went deeper into the river bay, traces of civilization were everywhere, including the leisurely turning mill windmills, groups of women farmers collecting firewood, roosters crowing on the earthen walls in the early morning, barking dogs, and knights and riders wearing old or bright mail armor rushing to the battlefield one after another. The war caused the entire Westeros continent to surge, and ordinary people also complained, but for some hired knights, mercenaries, and even bandits, this war was a rare opportunity to make a fortune. At this time, most lords would hire these third-rate people who were usually disdainful as a source of soldiers, and select some excellent hired knights from them as their own retainers. For these stray hired hands, besides taking this opportunity to make a fortune, they also want to find a master they can rely on to support themselves for the rest of their lives. Yes, the goal is that simple. Everyone knows that the knight class is a starting point of the nobility, but this statement is not correct. The simple title of knight cannot give the knights any wealth. At the same time, the daily consumption required to maintain this identity also forces them to do something such as being ordered around, running around, and even robbing. Only by winning an industry and turning from a simple knight into a wealthy knight can it be said that they have initially embarked on the road to nobility. But wealthy knights cannot be considered complete nobles because they do not have the right to hang people. Therefore, the knights in this world are not so tall and noble. The chivalry in the poems is mostly just something that the children of the nobility can brag about. For most civilian knights, they don't have enough food to eat all day, and they sleep in the wilderness to save money. How can they have the leisure to think about those things? Although he had been in this world for more than 6 years, the black-haired boy, who had never left his guardian, was actually quite unfamiliar with all this. This ancient and simple medieval world in his cognition now looked so vivid and lively as he continued to travel and observe it in person. The wildflowers swaying in the wind on the roadside, the creaking wheels of the ox cart, the bleating sheep, and even the simple smile of the passing farm girl. This is a real world. The boy sitting horizontally on the horse thought, feeling the touch and temperature from the woman behind him, and he secretly added, "It is also a chaotic world." It was the 284th year of Egon's conquest. Autumn had entered its end. The war had begun on the surface of the Western Summer Sea. Countless people flocked there, and countless people avoided it. Such a contradictory phenomenon tells of the eternal civilization habits of mankind, but all this could not affect the normal operation of all things in nature. On a dim morning, the first snowflakes of winter drifted down with a cold breeze. Chapter 147 Doran Coordinates. Let me go, you idiots who deserve to go to the 7th level of hell. You have no right to arrest me. You have no right to arrest Master Priest of Yanhua City. That is a complete old liar. You actually obeyed the orders of a liar to arrest your real master? You don't have the right. The one who started shouting was an old man with a grey beard, who was being dragged to the door of the hotel by 2 sturdy soldiers. The old man struggled hard, his face flushed and angry, but his old and weak body made it impossible for him to break free from the restraints. So with the soldiers dragging him unceremoniously, the old man in a dirty satin robe was dragged out of the wooden building hotel on the edge of a forest in the wild, and the angry and frightened voice gradually faded away. What a madman. Until no more voices could be heard, the hotel gradually returned to its previous hustle and bustle, and farmers, businessmen, hired knights, knights squires, all the travelers who stopped here talked about it. Who doesn't know that Lord Prest of Feastfire is an old bald man without a chin? Someone laughed, and he has no beard either. Don't mention it, the clothes he wears really make him look like a nobleman. It's just that he may not have taken a shower for a while. There are more and more crazy people recently. Listening to the discussions of the guests around him, the middle-aged innkeeper leaning against the wine cabinet wiped the cups and said to the silver-haired man sitting at a nearby table, "I heard a while ago that there was a man in Casterly Rock who claimed that he was a Duke of Lannister from more than 200 years ago. It would have been fine if he just said that, but he actually ran to the bottom of Casterly Rock Castle and shouted loudly, asking the Lannister masters in the castle to come out and recognize their ancestors." The innkeeper shook his head and laughed as he spoke, as if thinking about this matter made him feel very interesting. What happened later? The silver-haired man with a short haircut asked. What else can we do? The boss replied, they were kicked off the city wall by our Duke Tywin and drowned in the sea. It is said that His Majesty the King was visiting Casterly Rock at the time. I can't stand such a shameful thing. The short-haired man took a sip of the wine glass in front of him, and his face became very strange. A black-haired boy wearing linen clothes opposite him also had a strange expression at this time. He supported his chin with one hand, and the other finger wearing a cloth glove unconsciously tapped the table leg under his body, as if thinking about something. Such a special appearance made the innkeeper look at the mother and son more, but he didn't care much. After all, as an innkeeper, he had seen many weird people. That's right, mother and son. Although the silver-haired short-haired man was dressed like a man, the sharp-eyed boss noticed that the chest of the man wearing a black cloak was faintly bulging when he entered the inn. That was obviously not the body shape of man. However, there are actually quite a few women in the Seven Kingdoms who go out dressed as men. After all, this will reduce a lot of trouble, so he didn't care much. At the same time, a trace of kindness in his heart made him warn. The forest outside is not peaceful recently. I suggest you consider taking another route. Are there any robbers? The boy sitting opposite the silver-haired man asked curiously after hearing this. There is a group of robbers, but I haven't heard of them coming out to rob for a long time. The boss replied, maybe they broke up and went home to farm. If they have all broken up, how can there be any unrest? I heard that a group of iron men who came ashore and into the forest. The hotel owner replied, many people nearby said they saw their shadows. If you really say so, those iron men are quite kind. The silver-haired man sneered at this. They have been seen by others, but they don't kill them to silence them, waiting for the nearby masters to hear the news and encircle and suppress them. The kind persuasion was ridiculed. The hotel owner shook his head and said nothing more. He didn't speak, and the silver-haired man didn't speak again. Instead, he wolfed down a plate of pork pies on the table. The boy opposite him also chewed in small bites, looking absent-minded. The Lannister fleet was burned, and it was naturally difficult for the coastal areas in the Westerlands to defend against the invasion of the Ironborn. So it was not incomprehensible that there were really Ironborn coming here, but this place was not too far from Casterly Rock, and the Ironborn couldn't be so arrogant. These two people were naturally Meager and Renly. It had been more than 2 months since they landed on the shore, and the location had arrived to the north of Casterly Rock in the Westerlands, not far from Renly's destination, the sea area of Fairy City. During the journey, Meager accepted Renly's suggestion and dressed up as a man, while Renly himself had already changed out of his expensive silk clothes and dressed like an ordinary farm boy. But his appearance was too outstanding, so this kind of dressing was not so successful. In order to enhance the effect, Renly had to mess up his hair, and he was usually quiet and did not show any abrupt behavior. He had now confirmed one thing, that is, the time travel of these people was not caused by the replacement effect of the mark, and the chaotic mark on his left wrist was not just a simple, uncontrollable ability, but a channel. A channel connecting to the world of the last copy. Every time this channel was opened, a special power would be generated, causing the replacement effect between the two worlds, or alienation. But in fact, this strange power was just incidental. The main ability of the mark was still a channel, a coordinate, or a door. Behind the door was the world under his feet, and in front of the door was the historical copy. When someone in the copy pushed open the door and came to Renly's world, the strange power that Renly called chaos would breed and bring many troubles to Renly. That's right, someone pushed it open. The onset of the mark was not random, but depended on whether there was someone on the other side opening the door. This was not learned from Meager, but from the old man, who was just taken away. The other party was also a time traveler, and he was so scared that he told everyone that he was the real Earl of Preston, the current one was fake. As for why he ran out of the castle, it was because the fake Earl of Preston cast a spell and sent him out inexplicably. Renly went over to chat with him, so he easily learned the truth. The old man didn't actually see any so-called witchcraft. The reason he appeared here was that he was going to the toilet in the castle a while ago, but he opened the door and stepped into a different world. Renly then learned that the specific time he traveled here was exactly the same as the date of his last mark attack, and it was even the same morning. At the same time, he learned that the day when the female Meager sitting opposite appeared in this world was also the time when his wrist attacked on his way to Highgarden. Referring to the many rumors he heard along the way, Renly was finally able to determine that the mark was a door, or that the mark corresponded to a door, and the mark on his wrist was a transmission coordinate. Of course, Considering the seemingly large number of followers of the son of the drowned god in the Iron Islands, the door might not be limited to the shape or size of the door. Considering that Meager was in a coma before coming, he could also guess that the door might not require the person involved to take the initiative to open it, and that the door was not fixed, but appeared randomly in that world. So what happened in that world? This question always lingered in Renly's mind. The old man didn't know anything before, and even knew that King Enos died of illness, and Meager disregarded the succession law. This outdated news, and the silver-haired woman sitting opposite Renly didn't know why she appeared in this world. In other words, after being knocked unconscious during the trial, she was already here when she woke up again. These were of course not direct inquiries, but continuous temptations and guesses, and were finally confirmed by Renly. Therefore, the mark corresponds to a door, and the other world is not static. A special change has occurred in the other world. This change has turned Meager into a woman, and the door has appeared frequently from all over the world, and opened one after another. After opening, people or things will cross through. At the same time, the power of chaos will grow on the mark, causing trouble to oneself. "Hey, Kit, what are you thinking about?" A familiar voice interrupted Renly's meditation. He looked up and saw a silver-haired woman dressed as a man staring at him impatiently. "Eat quickly, we still have urgent things to do after eating. Why are you so slow like a woman?" The man in front of him is a fool. After hearing this, Renly silently gathered his thoughts and took a big bite of the pie. His observations along the way made him sure of this. "Thank you, Medilicky and Woody, for the 5,000 reward. Thank you to book friend Zianatang 246 and book friend who strives to become a top student for the 100 rewards in addition. I have basically finished talking about this thing. Friends who don't understand can leave a message in the book review area. Next, I will write about what it is used for." Chapter 148 Chaos is the Ladder. The urgent matter that Meager mentioned was not an important matter, but to change the horseshoes of an old chestnut horse named Red Whirlwind. Horse hooves are like human nails. They are easy to split after bearing the force that they should not bear. Therefore, it is necessary to nail horseshoes, which is like putting a shoe on the horse. However, the original shoes on the hooves of this trained horse bought from Lannister Port did not seem to fit well. After running for a while, the horseshoes on the soles of the feet suddenly fell off, so that they could not continue to travel. So they had to stay in a roadside inn in broad daylight to ask if there were any horseshoe repair masters nearby and fill their stomachs. Yes, filling their stomachs was actually a side job, and the main purpose was to inquire about the news. Changing horseshoes is not a job that anyone can do. It requires certain technical requirements. However, although the location is not a crowded and prosperous place, they have heard that there is such a master in a nearby village. So after eating all the pies, they led the horses and hurried in the direction they had inquired. The woman next to him kept yelling and cursing along the way, and her main meaning was basically to not let her see the horse dealer again, or else she would break his legs. Renly thought it was just a small problem, and there was no need to keep nagging about it for so long. But it was understandable that the other party was in a particularly bad mood because her relatives had come to visit these 2 days. But Renly still thought that the other party was a fool or a weirdo. After all the interactions along the way, he seriously suspected that the guy who was walking and cursing beside him had his brain damaged when they were fighting, so that he only did some things that made him feel inexplicable. For example, she could grab a passerby and rob him when she had no money to spend, but she had to walk a long way to change horseshoes for an old horse she bought. For example, she could break the neck of a forest bandit without hesitation, like breaking a chicken's neck, but she was seriously dissatisfied with Renly's behavior of climbing a tree to rob a bird's nest to improve his food. For example, although she made money very quickly through a robbery and had a lot of savings, she treasured the money she robbed like a treasure. She wanted to break a copper coin into 2 pieces to spend along the way. She was also stingy with food like a stingy old lady. If it weren't for safety considerations, she might even ask the 2 of them to sleep in the wild hedges instead of sleeping in hotel rooms like those poor hedge knights. Renly was really surprised by this. He felt that this kind of personality was nothing special for normal people. A guy who was born in a royal family, had no worries about food and clothing since childhood, and even became a king for a few days, wouldn't be so stingy, right? However, she was indeed so stingy. I don't know if it was her original personality or she became like this after becoming a woman. But in general, the two of them got along well along the way and there were no conflicts. On the one hand, it was because Renly usually behaved very honestly. On the other hand, although the other party had a weird personality, his temper was not very violent. In other words, she was indeed irritable and impatient, and also had a rebellious temper that did whatever she wanted without restraint, but these were very different from the various records in history. It might be that her female body made her much gentler, or it might be that she came to the modern times just after her coronation, so she had not experienced many things afterwards, and even the character of the tyrant was not completely formed. However, all this did not make Renly forget who they were, nor could he ignore the route they were currently taking. Now that he had basically emptied out everything that the other party knew and was interested in, there was only one reason why he had not escaped, that sea ghost. Although Renly felt that he had touched the chaotic mark, he was still confused about one thing, that is, the world behind the door should be the world he experienced in the second copy. Why did the people in his first copy also appear here? Could it be that Jasper and the followers of the son of the drowned god were all people in the second copy? This might be possible. After all, in a sense, they were all in the same world. But Renly was not sure about this, and it was also inconvenient to escape on land, so he was not completely sure. So he had been following the kidnapper's ass, ready to try his luck in the sea to see if he could meet the sea ghost. If he could, that would be great, but if he couldn't, it would be easy to escape. Hey, Kit, what are you thinking about? The words from the side interrupted the boy's wild thoughts. He looked sideways and saw that the silver-haired man who was leading the horse had handed the horse rope to a hunchbacked old man in an apron, and he came to the corner of the farmyard and stared at Renly suspiciously. At this time, they had arrived at the place where horseshoes were changed. I was thinking about what I heard in the hotel before. Renly answered smoothly, secretly wondering if the other party had awakened the woman's sixth sense. Why was it so sharp all of a sudden? The ghost of the son of the forest in the Red Lake? The silver-haired man raised his eyebrows and asked. No, it's that Lannister idiot who yelled about his ancestors. The boy brought up a very obvious topic and said, people from your world keep coming here. If the number is small, it's okay, but if the number is large, think about it. The noble lords who were born noble and had all kinds of rights will instantly become paupers with nothing, and even no identity. Will they be willing to be farmers, servants, mercenaries, or even bandits? Who would be willing? The other party sneered at the words. I asked you to change from a king to a beggar to beg for food. Are you willing? Renly shrugged and didn't respond, because the question already had an answer, and the answer was the man opposite who sneered at Renly's words. Chaos is a ladder. He thought of a famous saying about this world in his previous life. If you are unwilling, you must fight, usurp, or even make trouble. However, this situation is bound to impact the existing ruling class in Westeros. I don't know how effective this impact will be. Renly pondered secretly. The class order in this world is quite stable. Many lord families have a history of thousands of years. It is rumored that the Stark family in the north has existed for 9,000 years. It's scary to think about it. After waiting here for most of the day, the sky was approaching dusk. Finally, they led the old bay horse with a new shoe back to the previous hotel, ready to stay here for one night and continue their journey tomorrow morning. But not long after, they regretted this decision. It was dark, and just as the two were having dinner on the first floor of the hotel, a group of armed men suddenly kicked the door and walked in. Then, the hotel owner's terrified cry suddenly rang out. Ironman, you are. The last word was a shrill scream, and then the wild hotel on the edge of the forest was filled with shouts and screams, and the smell of blood gradually spread. Thank you Kylan Virus book friend for the 500 reward. Thank you Zyanatang 246 book friend and book friend 2017092715161425 for the 100 reward. Chapter 149 Trapped. The screams were left behind as they ran quickly. The people who were chatting in the hotel were either screaming and running away, or howling in anger. A large group of leather-armored ironmen holding axes and bows and arrows suddenly rushed in from outside the door, and then started killing without explanation. Some were looking for weapons, some were wearing armor, some were hiding under the table, and some were running upstairs. They came too suddenly, and everyone was caught off guard. The innkeeper's previous words were obviously not a lie. There was indeed a group of ironmen in the woods outside the hotel, but he didn't seem to expect that the group of ironmen would suddenly rush into his home, so that when the killing happened, he was the first to be chopped off half of his head by an axe. In such a chaotic situation, the two people, one big and one small, who were sitting in the inner position, were now fleeing towards the second and third floors of the hotel. Because the boy had short legs, he was suddenly picked up by the waist and carried on his shoulders. The big woman climbed the wooden stairs quickly with a tense face, and the bumps made Renly feel nauseous. Fortunately, the wooden stairs of the 3-story inn were not as long as those of the castle tower. After a while, they reached the top floor of the inn and rushed into an open room. There was a sleepy middle-aged businessman in the room. When he saw a man with a child breaking into the room, he asked, "Friend, what happened outside?" Meager did not answer, but punched the man to the ground, and then kicked him unconscious. After a series of actions, he put Renly down. "Hide here for the time being, I will find a way to break out." She said so. "Aren't you going to give me to the Ironborn?" Renly kindly reminded him, "There is a group outside now." "Shut up, kid, now is not the time to joke." The other party glared at the boy, turned around, closed the door, and plugged it from the inside. The group of sudden attackers outside were numerous, and they also had bows and arrows. She was not sure she could break out, let alone carrying a burden. At the same time, although she had the idea of trading with the Ironborn, she didn't want to talk to those guys who only knew how to obey orders. Moreover, if she contacted them without any preparation, it would be hard to say whether they would trade or be robbed. Renly on the side remained calm and didn't seem to be afraid that the current danger would endanger his own safety. The main reason was that his identity was a protection umbrella. No matter who was in his hands, he couldn't be killed at will. And even if the group of Ironborn captured him, wouldn't they have to go back to the sea? The difference between him and the person next to him was just relative familiarity and unfamiliarity. However, Renly didn't just wait and do nothing. He scanned the surroundings and found that the house he was in was a square wooden room. The round wooden beams above his head were simple and dirty. There was a straw mat in the corner of the wooden floor to make a bed. There was no furniture. There was only a narrow curtain window on the innermost wall, and now the curtain was slightly rippling with the breeze outside the window. After squinting his eyes, Renly turned his head to look at Meager. "What's your plan?" "Wait until the group of people go upstairs and disperse." The woman replied, "I'll break out." "You're not wearing armor," Renly reminded her, "and it's different from the last time they captured me. Now there's no hostage for you to threaten them. A bunch of bastards, they can't do anything to me." The defiant voice was full of arrogance, but Renly didn't comment on it. In addition to being good at naval warfare, the people of the Iron Islands are also famous for their individual strength in the Seven Kingdoms. There is no other reason, but the customs of the people are like this. The living environment of the Ironman has been very cruel since childhood. It is said that the women there can swing axes to resist foreign enemies during wartime. I have a suggestion. Listening to the increasingly loud screams and wails outside the door, Renly said, "This window is so small, even if they surround this place, they can't guard it specifically. I plan to climb out through this window. You hide here first, and then look for an opportunity to break out. We will meet in the stable. You want to take the opportunity to escape." The other party looked at him suspiciously. "Where can I run to in this situation?" Renly asked. "Or are you sure you can break out with me? A burden? That won't work either, I think." The other party paused as she spoke, because she clearly heard the sound of killing approaching the corridor outside the door. So she changed the subject and gritted her teeth and said, "Let's do it, kid. But I have to remind you that you can't escape on horseback at such a young age." After she finished speaking, she turned around and stared at the door, and Renly did not hesitate at all, turning around and running quickly towards the window without a windproof. The dirty curtain was a little sticky when I grabbed it, and I looked outside. After I opened it, the dim moonlight enveloped the backyard of the hotel. The night breeze was gentle, the weeds were swaying, and the many clothes drying on the clothes line were full of life. However, everything that happened in the hotel was obviously not peaceful at all. There were 2 strong ironmen wearing rusty silver mail armor and holding bloody long axes standing at the door handle. There were several corpses under their feet, but there was no one else outside. However, the 2 ironborn guards were not staring at the top of their heads at this time, but looking inside the door, obviously paying attention to whether anyone ran out of the door as a breakthrough, but they never thought that a child would come out of the narrow window. In fact, the small window on the 3rd floor of the hotel is a difficult hurdle even for children. The action of squeezing out made Renly's face flushed a little, but fortunately he successfully climbed out without making much noise. He carefully stepped on a protruding log outside the window, looked at the 2 people who were unaware of this not far below, took a breath secretly, and then leaned against the building and walked slowly. Although his young age limited his strength, it also made him light and agile. At the same time, his special bloodline also gave him much greater strength than normal children. So although the surface of this building was not full of stepping grounds like a certain game in his memory, he still gradually moved away from the sight of the 2 ironborn guarding the back door below. His tense nerves made him extremely focused. He followed the window parallel to the similar windowsills and wooden edges one after another, and finally turned a corner dangerously, and he completely left the backyard area of the hotel and came to the side. The various panicked sounds inside the building behind him were very obvious: women's screams, children's cries, adults' roars and screams, and the Iron Men's grim laughter when they killed. All the sounds eventually disappeared quickly as the black-haired boy jumped off the building. He landed nimbly on the top of a mud wall, then ran a few steps on the wall while maintaining balance, and finally jumped down along the corner into another yard. This was a backyard next to the hotel building, and it was also where the stables were located. The shouts and killings behind him were so weak at this time, but the neighing and panting of horses could be heard faintly. Looking around, the long thatched roof building was at the end of the yard, which was the main body of the stable. However, when Renly rushed in from the back door of the stable, he suddenly found that there were actually 2 young Iron Men inside. When Renly ran in, the 2 of them also looked over. Chapter 150, Remarks on the release. I have been writing for almost 3 months, and it is finally going to be published. The first feeling is that it is a bit bitter. After all, other people publish it with 200,000 words, or even less than 200,000 words, and I have only just reached this goal after writing 400,000 words. But then I thought, my last book was published with 360,000 or 370,000 words, so I felt that this might still be my problem. In fact, I didn't want to write this book at first, because the movement in July was a bit big, and the impact was also very wide, and it felt very dangerous to write fanfiction. But then I thought that I couldn't prepare for this in vain, and the old book also promised to open a fanfiction again. So I gritted my teeth and wrote this one, which may be the last fanfiction. In fact, the desire to write this book is actually very simple, just to make up for some regrets in the previous book. In the previous book, I also wrote Game of Thrones, but the writing was always the kind of floating at the top, and it was not integrated into the world of Westeros at all. So in this book, I set the protagonist's identity as a soul, not a body. At the same time, I wanted to write about the growth of a noble child from childhood to adulthood, and the education and experiences related to it, so the age setting was relatively young. At the same time, I didn't want to write about a person who was born in a secondary lord family and had to be loyal to others, so I raised this identity to the top. Now that I think about it, this decision really made me uncomfortable. Some highlights that should have been at the top of the identity were suppressed to the lowest due to the age limit. At the same time, the status brought by the high identity would not allow anyone to come up and find fault for no reason. Therefore, this book looks very bland in many places, but this also has a lot to do with my personal writing style. It seems that I had a problem in my last book, that is, I didn't know how to make the details appropriate, so I had to write about it in detail when I caught a little thing. I always felt that it would be wrong if I didn't write this, and that if I didn't write that, something would be missing. But in fact, after writing it, from a general point of view, some things were not necessary to write at all, but slowed down the rhythm. I hope I can improve this later. Then I'll talk about the key points. Today's update plan is 9 chapters. Because I will scan the webpage and recheck and revise it after publishing, I will not release it all at once. I will publish it in the afternoon one after another. The best time to watch it should be in the evening. Originally, I planned to have 10 chapters, but recently my dental problems caused a serious attack of my procrastination, so I didn't save that much. Think about 9. 9 is 9. 10 updates are so vulgar, and how can things be perfect? Don't you agree? Cough cough. At the same time, I have to mention the issue of piracy. I don't reject piracy, because I used to read pirated books when I didn't have money, and then I gradually got a job. But I still hope that friends who have the conditions can come to Gideon to support the genuine version. I dare not say anything else. The genuine experience of this book is definitely better than the pirated one, because I will revise it again after publishing, and the pirated ones are all first drafts. Of course, to be honest, the revise is only in terms of text. The plot is still the same. It's a matter of reading experience. Friends who have read the last book should know that I have this habit for a long time. I did not write it badly on purpose, but I proofread it again, based on the finished manuscript. I hope that doing so can give readers who support genuine products a better reading experience, rather than spending money, but feeling that there is no difference. Without further ado, it is on the shelves today. Thank you to the Gideon platform. Thank you to my old editor unsettling. Thank you to my new editor Looming. Thank you to the behind the scenes staff of Gideon. And thank you to those who should be thanked. Most importantly, thank you. Thank you to the friends who liked this book before, like this book now, and will like this book in the future. Thank you. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.